Joe Rogan Podcast, check it out.
The Joe Rogan Experience.
Train by day, Joe Rogan Podcast by night, all day.
Michael Shermer.
I come bearing signed gifts for you,
Thank
sir.
you very much.
I hope that's the right
Why
one.
the rational believe the irrational.
Right.
Why is that? Is it simple? It wouldn't be this big of a book
No.
if it was simple.
Yeah, it's not that simple. But, well, first of all, my argument is that it's not irrational to believe conspiracy theories because enough of them are true that it pays to err on the side of assuming more of them are true than actually are, than missing real conspiracy theories, and then that's a costlier error to make.
That's a rational perspective.
Yeah.
The term conspiracy theory got thrown about. There was the first introduction of it into the zeitgeist was during the Kennedy assassination, correct?
Yeah, well, around that time, right? Before that, before World War II, really, conspiracy theories were kind of common knowledge. Everybody knew that things were going on behind closed doors, and it was just kind of commonly known. We just kind of try to figure it out. It didn't become really fringy until right after the JFK thing. That it kind of got as a meme that you're crazy to think these conspiracy theories are true. It became pathologized.
Yeah.
Richard Hofstadter's, the paranoid style in American politics kind of put that on the map. It's conspiracy theories are something delusional. It's a pathology in your brain. Whereas before that, it wasn't. It was just, even the Declaration of Independence, it's a conspiracy theory. It's saying, look, the British are doing this whole train of abuses and usurpations, and here's what we think they're up to, and here's what we think they want to do, and we're against that. That's printed right there in the Declaration. So It's not fringy, right? It was kind of commonly known that these things happen.
The term as a pejorative, though, was introduced into like sort of the American culture around the Kennedy assassination.
Yeah, that's an interesting story because I'm convinced Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. I'm not
Really?
Yes, I am.
What makes you convinced of that?
Oh, well, I have a whole chapter on it, and we can get into that in a second. But the twist about it, where it seems like there was something up, was that President Johnson was worried that if it looks like there's a conspiracy afoot with the Cubans or the Russians, that could lead to a nuclear exchange. So we don't want the American people to think that this is some kind of vast conspiracy of the Russians, so we can avoid war.
Have you gone back and forth on that at all, or is it just something you've always believed?
No. Before the Oliver Stone film, I hadn't really given it that much thought. I thought, well, the Warren report seems pretty thorough, but who knows? What do I know? And then the Oliver Stone film, which floats every conspiracy theory there was in one package, and I thought, well, if 10% of this is true, seems like there was something else going on. But then, there were web pages posted of like, here are all the mistakes in the film and here are all the counter arguments. And then I read Gerald Posner's book, Case Closed, about the life of Lee Harvey Oswald and why all the evidence points to him. And then Vincent Bugliosi's book, Reclaiming History, which is like 1,500 pages long, and it dissects every one of the hundreds of conspiracy theories. There are something on the order of 140 people have been accused, and a couple hundred organizations have been affiliated with the JFK assassination. The problem is that there's no convergence of evidence to any other one than Lee Harvey Oswald acting alone. And all the evidence points to him. So it's not impossible.
All the evidence points to him.
Massive amounts of evidence, right. And so now we're supposed to get a new tranche of documents.
But they're not. They won't release them. They keep stopping the release of these documents.
This worries me because that makes people suspicious, as it should. And so,
But wait a minute. It worries you because it makes people suspicious, or it worries you because it points to their withholding information because that information looks bad?
I would love to see the information, and I would change my mind in a heartbeat.
What are your thoughts on the magic bullet?
Okay, the magic bullet is not a magic bullet. It's a single bullet theory. That is, what it's usually rendered as is Kennedy and Connally are sitting like this, back.
Oh, I'm aware of all of it.
Yeah, right. So the bullet doesn't have to go left, right, and so forth.
Kennedy was elevated.
Yes, Right.
Yeah.
So if you draw a line straight back to the 6th floor window of the book depository building, the bullet goes straight through his back, out his neck, into Connolly, through his arm, into his leg, and so forth, in a straight line.
Well, the only reason why they had to come up with the theory that one bullet did all that damage. You know that, right?
Well,
do you know why?
Well, I don't know. Go ahead.
Because someone was hit by a ricochet in the underpass. And so they had to attribute all that damage to one bullet.
Right, that's right, yeah.
But there's more in Connolly's body. There was more pieces of bullet than were missing from the actual bullet itself. Mm-hmm. Did you ever look at the actual bullet itself? Have you studied it?
Yeah, I have a picture of it in there.
Yeah, I know a lot about bullets.
Yeah,
and one of the problems about bullets is there's never been a bullet that's gone through bone and shattered bone and gone through 2 different bodies and came out looking like that. Well, that looks like a bullet that was shot into water.
It is deformed, though.
It's slightly deformed, but every bullet that leaves a gun is slightly deformed. That indicates even more so that it didn't hit anything. When bullets hit things, they deform. That's the whole purpose of making bullets like that. These bullets are designed to shatter things and expand upon impact, and it creates more damage.
Well, hollow point bullets are.
Sure, but all bullets are.
Yeah.
Hollow points even more specifically, but all bullets are designed to expand upon impact.
Right.
Even rifle bullets that are copper, because in California you can't use lead bullets anymore because condors and a lot of other birds of prey, they eat the lead bullets and they get lead poisoning because like if there's an animal that gets shot and the hunter doesn't recover it and then the condor or something else eats that, some sort of a raptor eats that, then they get lead poisoning. But bullets expand and they break up. They don't look like that. That bullet was found in Connolly's gurney, which is like so ridiculous. The idea that, oh, look, we found the bullet here. It just managed to magically fall out of his body and look pristine.
Okay, 80% of the ear witnesses heard 3 shots.
Yeah, but
and
witnesses.
The first shot missed.
But witnesses.
Well, yeah, but okay. So
that's just asking people what happened. If you talk to witnesses after 9/11, they said they heard explosions.
Yes, right. Yeah, right. Exactly. So again, it's a probability argument. It's not black or white.
But the probability of that having gone through bodies is very low.
Well, I don't know if you've seen those tests where they shoot the bullet through the foam stuff that mimics a human body and so forth. And
but
it does
gel.
get deformed like that.
That's ballistic gel.
Yeah.
Ballistic gel is not bone.
But they have shot it through pigs with the bone and tendons and ligaments and muscles and all that.
Never looks like that.
Well, anyway, there's good shows on this.
No. It never looks like that. There's no evidence of bullets hitting bone where they come out looking like that.
I don't know, Joe. Are you sure? Because I'm pretty sure it was it was either Nova or National Geographic that did this and replicated it, shot it right through a body.
No, I saw that. They looked deformed. The bullets looked deformed. They were bent up.
Yeah. Okay. So what is your counter then?
I think Lee Harvey Oswald was involved. I certainly think he was involved. And I think the possibility of a conspiracy is high. I do not know whether or not Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. I think Lee Harvey Oswald was most certainly a part of it. But when Lee Harvey Oswald was captured, when they were talking to him, he said, "I'm a patsy."
Yeah.
I'm inclined to believe he was a patsy. But I'm also inclined to believe that he had knowledge of it. He was there for probably a very specific reason, and they were probably setting him up. I think there was probably multiple people involved.
Yeah, who's the they?
Who is the they? That's the question. Is it the CIA? Was it the mafia? Were they upset because he turned on them after they got him elected? Because there was a conspiracy to help him get elected. The mob was involved in getting JFK elected. Was it the people that were upset because of the Bay of Pigs incident? Was it the CIA because he wanted to disband them? Well, who knows? I think there was a lot of people that John F. Kennedy upset.
Well, that's true for every president, though. But the ones that don't get shot, then no one pays attention to that. How many people hated Trump or Nixon especially?
Right, but we're talking about an actual murder. You're not saying it's true of every president is fine, but we're talking about a president that was murdered. And you look at the people that may have had some sort of a vested interest in getting rid of them.
Okay, so here's one argument I'm making. It's the argument from proportionality, that the effect should have a matching size cause. So let me just back up here for a second. If you take a little pebble and throw it, it doesn't take a lot of effort to do it. A fist-size stone takes more effort, a big boulder, massive effort. So our folk physics, we feel like cause and effect should match, right? So interesting experiment if you take the subjects and give them 2 dice and say, okay, now try to roll a low number. They'll kind of just gently toss it like that. Now try to roll a high number, like an 11 or 12. They'll give it a good heave like that.
That's dumb people.
Well, but that's our intuitions.
But that's people that don't know about dice. Okay. We're not talking about trained assassins.
Okay, but let me finish. So, our sense is that big events, JFK assassination, Princess Di dies, 9/11, COVID-19, counterfactually, if Oswald had missed Kennedy or just wounded him and he didn't die, would there be massive conspiracy theories about who he was? Okay, so this has actually happened.
Well,
John Hinckley.
Hold on, that's a straw man because you're saying that Oswald did act alone if he had missed.
Yeah, if he had missed. Nobody would
we're
make
talking
a big deal about it.
After the murder.
Right,
the reason why
that's
there's a conspiracy is because he was murdered.
Right. So why are there no conspiracy theories about John Hinckley shooting Reagan?
Because John Hinckley has a real trail of mental illness. He wrote letters to Jodie Foster. He was a very specific human being who was obsessed with killing Reagan to impress Jodie Foster.
Right.
It's all really documented. He's out now, too. It's not like they got rid of him like they got rid of Jack Ruby.
Or Squeaky Fromm tried to shoot Gerald Ford.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but she missed.
But she was also in the Manson family. There's a big conspiracy about that. About the Manson family and the fact that Charles Manson was a part of MK Ultra.
Oh yes, right. So
did you ever read Chaos by Tom O'Neill?
No, I haven't read that.
It's a fantastic book. It's all about why Manson kept getting released. Manson was in jail, right? And during the time he was in jail, he was visited by Jolly West, who was the head of the CIA's MK Ultra LSD experiments. They most certainly did something to Manson while he was in jail. And they also supplied him. There's anecdotal evidence that shows that they supplied him with LSD when he got out of jail. Mm-hmm. Every time he got arrested for violating parole, these cops and these local sheriffs that had caught him were told that it was above their pay grade and they had to release him. Manson got out for multiple offenses after he was on parole, things that should have kept him locked up. Mm-hmm. There's some real good evidence that about MK Ultra was a real thing, and that's an interesting conspiracy, right? Because it's a real one, documented.
Our own government was doing.
Yeah,
this.
Well, there's Operation Midnight Climax that they were involved with, where they were. Do you know about that one? Mm-hmm. That's where they were dosing up Johns when they would go to visit prostitutes, and they would film them through two-way mirrors.
Right.
Jolly West was a part of that, and he also was a part, in some way, shape, or form, of that Manson family.
Okay, but my point is that let's say it was the mayor of Dallas that was shot that day, would there be vast conspiracy industry of books and films and so on?
Who knows? But it wasn't the mayor. It was the president of the United States, which makes it a far bigger issue.
Right, that's my point. We want something big. It doesn't seem right that a lone nut like Lee Harvey Oswald could have pulled this off, or that 19 guys with box cutters could have taken down the World Trade Center buildings. It just doesn't feel right. So we add elements. This is my theory. We add elements of causality to match it. Princess Di, cause of death, drunk driving, speeding, no seatbelt. But it doesn't feel right that a princess, famous and so forth, would die the same way.
Yeah, but you're adding a bunch of different conspiracies to one that's very specific. Well, you're adding a bunch that are much more easily disprovable than one that's very specific. This is my problem with all conspiracy theories. And one of the things that you said at the beginning, some of them are real.
Yeah, that's right. All right, so let's distinguish conspiracy theories from conspiracies. Conspiracies, by definition, are two or more people plotting in secret to gain an unfair, illegal, or immoral advantage over somebody else. That happens all the time, right?
Sure.
So how do we know? So it's a signal detection problem. How do you know which conspiracy theories are correct? They tag an actual conspiracy, right? So I draw this 2x2 grid. So up here you have real conspiracy theories that are real, and you associate them with that correctly. You say, yeah, that's what I agree. That's a hit. Mm-hmm. So conspiracy theories that are real, and you go, no, I don't believe it. I don't think there's a real conspiracy. That's a miss. So that's a big miss, right? That's a type 2 error. You don't want to miss those because those are real. That could harm you. Down here you have conspiracy theories that are not true and you think they are, so that's a false positive, a type 1 error. That's a low-cost error to make. It doesn't cost a lot. It's not risky to assume a conspiracy theory is real when it's not. And so this is my argument, is that we've evolved this cognition to be very suspicious and paranoid about other people and what they're doing because historically and evolutionarily wise, in these small bands and tribes of hunter-gatherers, anthropologists tell us there's a lot of conniving and cabals and,
right.
and so on. This goes on. So I call this constructive conspiracism. It pays to be a little paranoid, because sometimes they really are out to get you.
But it also pays to be rational and recognize which ones are conspiracies and which ones are probably people just in the moment of chaos like 9/11, adding a bunch of stuff to what they've experienced in just the chaos of the incident. And I've heard explosions. I saw this, I saw that. And you know that in times like that of great distress, people and eyewitness testimonies are some of the most unreliable, because people are so blown away by the extreme moment that they can't really recall things correctly.
Okay, now let's just do another counterfactual. Like, what would be true if this really was a conspiracy? Well, there should be some documentation somewhere.
There is, and that's why they won't release it.
Yeah, well, okay, so this is the problem. Release it, damn it.
Yeah,
right?
well, why do you think? But what possible reason?
I thought Trump was going to release it. I was quite surprised.
I don't think they want to let anybody release that stuff.
If it's anything, if I had to guess, it would be something like what the CIA was up to, even more than what we know about. You know, overthrowing, rigging elections in South American countries, assassinating communist dictators.
Real conspiracies.
These are real conspiracies. These things happen. We found out about this in the 90s.
So why are you so convinced that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone?
Okay, so let's just pull back for a second.
Okay.
All right, I'm not God. You're not either. I'm not omniscient. We don't know for sure what happened.
I'd
Nobody
like to get
does.
you in a room with Oliver Stone. Because Oliver Stone is so compelling. I mean, that guy will talk for days and days about it.
I know. I watched his 4-hour documentary. I watched him.
What did you think about it?
Well, okay, so again, here's my problem, is that it's not just a black and white thing. What's most likely to be true? Okay, well, the evidence is massive against Lee Harvey Oswald. Okay, for sure he was at least involved.
Yeah.
All right, who else would have been involved? Okay, can you put, so Stone think, well, CIA, Alan Dulles, something. If you had Alan Dulles here, could you get a grand jury to agree we have enough evidence to put him on trial? I don't think so. There's nobody, in fact, that you could point to that a grand jury would say.
Well, we're talking about something that happened over 50 years ago.
Well, I mean, just rewind the tape to 10 years after or something and go, okay, so we got somebody. Here he is. Well, this actually happened, right? Jim Garrison put on trial Clay Shaw and pointed all the evidence he could find, and the jury acquitted him in under an hour.
The jury also acquitted O.J. Simpson.
Well, yes, okay.
You know, I don't know if that's real good evidence. Juries are, you know, they're not the most informed people.
Well, there was a made-for-television BBC trial of Lee Harvey Oswald in absentia, in which was it Jerry Spence was his defense attorney in absentia, and what's his name was the prosecutor, the Reclaiming History, the Manson guy, the guy who put Manson away. I just mentioned his name. I'm sorry, I'm spacing out on it. Vincent Bugliosi. Again, the jury, again, it's not a real jury, it's a made-for-TV series, but they presented all the evidence and they acquitted, they convicted Oswald based on the evidence as the lone assassin, because there was just nothing pointing to anybody else. So here's how I think about it. There could be somebody else involved, but we need some evidence, at least some paper trail. Why in the Pentagon Papers that released all these top secret documents that Nixon tried to cover up and prevent from being published? There's nothing in there about the conspiracy to assassinate. The CIA was involved.
They've stopped release of all of the documents about the Kennedy assassination. They keep postponing it decades and decades.
Right. My guess is probably the CIA was up to even more no good back in the 60s and 70s. We know you mentioned MK Ultra. Don't forget
that's a good guess, but another good guess is that they were involved in the assassination in some way.
Okay, then I'm a good Bayesian. I'm willing to update my priors, change my credence, and change my mind completely and go yes. But
I'm just very suspicious.
Yeah, I mean,
multiple parts of that assassination, including the fact that do you know that Jolly West visited Jack Ruby while he was in jail? And Jack Ruby, something happened to him. He went fucking completely insane after visiting with Jolly West. And the assumption is that Jolly West gave Jack Ruby LSD while he was in jail.
maybe.
But why would Jolly West go to visit the guy that killed Lee Harvey Oswald when he was the head of a mind control experiment for the CIA?
Again, this is what's called anomaly hunting. Like any big event, we go searching for any little thing that's weird.
Giant anomaly.
Like the umbrella guy, the umbrella man, Louis Witt on the.
There's a lot of that silly shit. You can but that points to this thing where people always try to look for connections. And I do agree with you that a lot of conspiracy theories are ridiculous. But a lot of conspiracies, as you said, are real. I don't know if Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone, but I have a feeling that there were other people involved based on the evidence, based on a lot of it.
In like Stone's thesis that the CIA military-industrial complex and so on were involved because Kennedy wanted to get us out of Vietnam. Nixon got us out of Vietnam. How come no one assassinated him from the military-industrial complex?
Well, that's only one piece. His assumption that it was because of them trying to get out of Vietnam was only one of the assumptions that they made. His other assumptions were the mob, it was the CIA, he wanted to get rid of a lot of the intelligence agencies. He had a real problem with secret societies and secrecy in government. And he made that famous speech about secret societies.
Right. Well, and again, it's complicated by the fact that we did try to invade Cuba using Cuban nationalists in the Bay of Pigs. That was a disaster.
Also,
the CIA,
Operation Northwoods.
Operation Northwoods.
That's one of the creepiest ones.
Oh, totally.
The fact that was a real conspiracy, that they were really planning blowing up a drone jetliner and blaming it on the Cubans. They were going to arm Cuban friendlies and attack Guantanamo Bay, all to get us to go to war with Cuba. It's pretty wild that was signed by the Joint Chiefs of Staff and vetoed by Kennedy.
And McNamara, he didn't go for it either. But this is an example, again, of constructive conspiracism. It's not irrational to think that a lot of conspiracy theories might be true because enough of them have been, or COINTELPRO, where the FBI was sending in agents to act as social justice activists in American Indian movement, feminist groups, the Black Panthers, and so on, and including blackmailing Martin Luther King Jr. Recording his sexcapades in hotel rooms. Our government was doing this. What?
Yeah.
Okay.
The guy who assassinated Martin Luther King. What is
Ray.
Ray. Jesus Christ! It escapes me. What is his name?
James Earl Ray.
James Earl Ray.
Yeah.
James. I always forget that guy's name for some reason. But I talked to Mike Baker, who was formerly with the CIA. I use air quotes formerly. He had investigated that for his television show, and he said that is one of the weirdest ones because that guy was funded in some strange way. Like he was kind of a loser, and then all of a sudden he had money, and there was someone he believes was involved in aiding that guy to assassinate Martin Luther King.
Again, so like we have the WikiLeaks, okay, millions and millions of top secret documents. Why is there no mention of 9/11 as an inside job? Some documentation of somebody inside.
But maybe 9/11 wasn't an inside job. Maybe that's why.
Yeah, and why is there nothing about JFK or the fake moon landing? Nothing like that. So we would expect if X was true that the following should happen.
Yeah, but WikiLeaks didn't get all of the documents that the government has ever hidden. That's a weird way to connect the dots there, Mr. Shermer.
I'm disconnecting the dots.
Are you working for the governor or the government? What's going on with you?
I'm an agent of disinformation. I've been accused of that, actually.
Have you been? I think I have been too. It's okay.
Yeah, but I mean, again, how do these systems really work? So this is my kind of conspiracy detection kit. The grander the conspiracy theory, the less likely it is to be true. Like say Volkswagen cheating the emission standards in Europe. That's a very specific conspiracy theory. Turned out to be true. They really did do that, and for obvious reasons, profit motive, right? But so if you scale up from that, they're trying to control the entire European economy or something like. Well, no, that's too big.
That's just trying to make money.
They're just trying to make money, right? So, the more people that have to be involved, the more elements that have to come. People are incompetent. People can't keep their mouth shut.
For the most part.
For the most part, yes. Now, to be fair to the other side, if you read about the development of the U-2 spy plane and the AR-71 Blackbird, this was done in Burbank, where you used to live. And that's right in the heart of LA. How did they do this for all those years and nobody knew about it, right?
Well, they were acting on the interests of the government. They were trying to be patriots. They kept their mouth shut because they were trying to win a war against the evil others.
Right. So, again, like with the recent UAP sightings, what I want, my initial response is the SR-71 Blackbird was, before it was declassified, there were commercial pilots going, oh my God, there's something going 3,000 miles an hour, 50,000 feet above me at 30,000 feet. This is impossible. We don't have anything like that. Well, actually, we did have something like that.
Yeah,
so I suspect that
that's what you think the
some
UAPs
of these UAP,
are?
I think in a decade or two, we're going to find out, oh, we had these incredible drones that could fly at these speeds. And
I tend to lean towards that as well sometimes. I go back and forth with it. I had Ryan Graves on recently.
I saw that.
It was a fascinating conversation because the way he was describing things with no visible means of propulsion, no technology that we currently know is available could act in the way those things were acting. I wonder if that is what it is, if they have some sort of very advanced drones. And the fact that they seem to be transmedium, they seem to be able to enter into the ocean and then leave the ocean, I wonder if that's something that we have, because these things, they're, one of the ones that he described is like a translucent circle with a black sphere inside of it.
Right.
And that when they updated their radar systems in 2014, they started seeing them all over the place on their systems. And that these people spotted them visually, and that they were behaving in a way like at 130 mile an hour winds were completely stationary. I wonder if those are super advanced drones.
Another problem with these videos is that they're very grainy, blurry. You can't quite make out what's going on. Like the one that it looks like it goes in the ocean, comes back out. It's not clear that it goes in the ocean because the horizon in the ocean is so blurry, right? So I'm a member of this Galileo project at Harvard, run by Avi Loeb, the head of the astronomy department.
I had Avi on.
Yep, I know.
Yeah.
And he's raising money to put cameras, high resolution cameras, all over the world, particularly in the places where people like Graves say when Graves told you, we saw these things every day, it's like every day.
Yeah.
There surely must be high-resolution photos of these things. But
those jets are not designed to take high-resolution video. They're designed to fight against enemy jets.
Right.
That's what they're designed for. They're designed to recognize these enemy combatants and engage with them in the most effective way possible. That's not with high-resolution digital video.
Right. Well, that would be the solution. We just need better data, right?
Well, I wonder if they want better data. Now, let's assume
we do.
The government, but listen, the federal government.
Yeah,
imagine they are running top secret programs using advanced drones and a technology that we're not currently aware of, right? And that the United States government has these. They wouldn't want people taking videos of these things. Why would they?
Right, but everyone has one of these in their pocket.
But you can't get digital video of something that's 7 miles away moving at the speed of sound.
Well,
you're not going to get digital video of that.
That's what we want to do with the Galileo project.
And
get
according
those cameras
to
up there.
Christopher Mellon, a guy who did work for the Defense Department, he said there are top secret videos and photographs that he's seen or that he's aware of that are pretty spectacular that they don't understand.
Right, I've heard him say that. It's like, okay, then let's see them. Well,
but why would they release that? This is the question: is like if they, just like the Blackbird, just like the stealth bomber, many of the other projects that they have that were top secret before they became public, why would they release all that information?
Probably wouldn't. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I wonder what that stuff is. And the fact that it happens so often in that very specific area, who knows?
Another thing I was thinking about with the UAPs is in the history of technology, no nation gets very far ahead of any other nation.
Right.
They either back engineer it or copy it or steal the secrets and so on. It's not likely we would have anything that the Russians and Chinese wouldn't be pretty close to having also. Just think of just the development of jets.
Or the development of the nuclear bomb.
The nuclear bomb. I mean, the Russians had, so 1945 was Hiroshima, and 1949 the Russians, they stole our secrets, right? So this idea that, these are super advanced drones that we have and the Russians and Chinese don't have, it's not likely they would not know the technology that we know, the physics, the aerodynamics, and the engineering and all that, because they read the same journals. They do the same research we do.
So what do you think it is?
Well, I think it's probably multiple things. I think some of them might be drones that just really high tech drones. Some of them are just blurry videos that are. I think the one of the sphere inside the cube
inside the sphere
is probably a balloon.
A balloon?
Yes.
A balloon that stands stationary at 130-mile-an-hour winds?
Appears to stand stationary.
Appears with the most sophisticated tracking devices that these military jets have.
I know. These are anomalies. Yeah. So we just need better
data. But why
data.
would you think it's a balloon?
Well, what else would it be? Okay, it might be, it might be a drone. It's certainly probably not an alien spacecraft and so on.
Certainly probably not. Why do you say that?
This kind of gets into the argument of the SETI program.
Yeah.
There's so much empty space out there. The chances of them finding us are pretty slim. I separate.
But we
two
find
questions.
Planets all the time.
Yeah, but
We are
telescopes, not visiting.
Telescopes and satellites
Right.
and all sorts of things that we send into space. But we find planets all the time that are in the Goldilocks zone, and we have very relatively unsophisticated in terms of like what we'd expect from something that's capable of intergalactic travel. Relatively simple technology in comparison to what we would think if you took what we have today and you increased our capabilities, 1,000 years from now. You could imagine that it would be quite easy for someone to at least send a drone from another planet to visit Earth and observe.
This is the Fermi paradox.
Yes.
Yeah, that you know of. And where are they? Well, of course, most scientists like him don't think they're here. So I separate two questions. Most scientists.
Michio Kaku thinks they're here.
He's been a little fuzzy about that. He's not totally committed to that.
He's totally committed. He was here.
So?
He was here, and he talked about it on the podcast. He said for the longest time he was a skeptic.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Okay, he has kind of come down on that side a little bit.
But why would you be firm on that? When you think about the fact that there's hundreds of billions of galaxies in the known universe.
Yes. Let's separate two questions. Are they out there? Have they come here? Are they out there? Almost certainly.
Right.
I would say 99.9% they're out there.
I would agree with you.
100 billion stars in our galaxy, 100 billion to a trillion galaxies. Just do the numbers.
Yeah.
No matter how improbable it is, you get from bacteria to big brains and civilization, it's going to happen.
Right.
But have they come here? Okay, so how good is the evidence for that? Not very. It's pretty thin, right?
How good?
It's anecdotal. It's human eyewitnesses. It's blurry videos, grainy photos. If they were here, damn it. Where's pick up the widget on the dashboard and bring it back here.
But just looking at what we know that these fighter pilots have witnessed, the data that they've acquired, when they're looking at something like Commander David Fravor, who, when they were off the coast of the Nimitz, when they tracked that thing that went from above 60,000 feet above sea level to 50 feet above sea level in less than a second. What's that?
I don't know.
Yeah, what is that thing that they have visual? They have visual contact by multiple sources, and they tracked it, and they have video of this thing moving off at insane rates of speed. What's that?
Yeah, I don't know. This is the problem with anomalies. No theory explains everything, right?
But if there was any evidence that pointed to something that operated in a way that we can't comprehend any of the known technologies being able to reproduce, that's one of them.
But no technologies come out of a vacuum like that. They always build on previous technologies.
Right, but if you're talking about something from another planet,
well, okay,
or something from another civilization that we're not aware of that's on Earth, maybe that lives in the water, we don't know. We don't know. And when you're seeing these things, when you're talking about people that are the best fighter pilots that we have available, that are operating with the most sophisticated fighter jets, with tracking systems that are constantly being updated, and then when they update them, they start picking up these things, like Ryan Graves discussed on the podcast. Why would you think that those are not possibly something from somewhere else?
It depends on how you want to pose the problem. So here's how I think about it. So I take Leslie Kean's a book on UFOs and pilots and generals go on the record and so on. In that book, she says 90 to 95% of all sightings have perfectly normal explanations.
I would probably agree that's true.
So the question is, what do we do with that other 5% of anomalies? Okay, no theory explains everything. There's always going to be anomalies in every scientific theory. What do you do with it? Nothing. You assign it to a graduate student to figure it out, or that's future research. Rather than going to a grand theory of visitation by aliens, or the Russians or Chinese have these super advanced technologies that we don't have, or we have them and they don't have. I mean, again, if we had this technology, surely the Russians have something pretty close to that. There's nothing from the videos in Ukraine of any Russian drones that act anything like these UAPs. Surely they would use this technology if they had it.
Well, we're assuming that those UAPs are military in nature and not something that they use to observe things.
Yeah, could be.
I mean, why would we assume that these things, if they're capable of behaving in this way and they're just some sort of a device that can travel at insane rates of speed, why would we assume that those things can launch missiles or act in a military capacity?
Right.
And you know there are UAP sightings over Ukraine.
Yeah, but okay, so Avi did a nice paper on that showing that these were artillery shells and not what the other people said they thought it was, that it was like a drone or a plane or something weird like that. He showed that if it was what they thought it was, it would have had a much bigger impact going through the atmosphere at that speed and burning up. But it didn't, so these are artillery shells. Anyway, he did a nice paper on that.
Interesting.
So, yeah.
So, but what about these things that supposedly move far faster than the speed of sound without the sonic boom?
Yeah, how is that possible?
How is that possible?
That's right. It's not.
That's
so
where it gets weird.
That's where it gets weird, right?
But
so
that's where
is it
the
really
question
moving?
Is it ours?
Is it really moving at that speed, or is it a misperception of the video, a miscalculation? Scientists make miscalculations of these sorts of things all the time.
Yeah, that was one of the things that was posed to David Fravor, and he said they have multiple sources of data. It's not just like one system that's monitoring these things. It's multiple systems.
Yeah. And I follow these guys. I agree. They are incredibly credible, right? And they have good arguments. What do you do with the anomalies?
I think you're an anti-conspiracy theorist. That's what I think.
No, I'm a skeptic, Joe.
I know you are.
I'm just a,
you literally are the editor. Or
skeptic.
what's your position in Skeptic Magazine?
I'm the editor-in-chief, publisher of Skeptic Magazine.
There you're literally a skeptic.
Yeah, that is my day job.
Yeah.
But it isn't that I don't believe things. I mean, I believe the theory of evolution. I think the Big Bang Theory happened when people like Neil deGrasse Tyson and my quantum physics friends tell me quantum physics is true. This is how we know it. To me, it's weird, spooky. I don't really understand it, but okay. You know, we have tons of evidence.
Have you seen some of the new discussions based on the observations from the James Webb telescope that maybe the Big Bang Theory needs to be revisited?
Yes, vaguely. It was the expansion rate changing, right, from the new...
well, they're getting new data, right?
Right.
They're constantly getting new data, and we would assume that with more and more sophisticated ways of viewing the known universe, that we could possibly get some new data that would change our ideas of what the theory of the Big Bang Theory or the theory of the universe itself would be. And that's one of the things that they're discussing right now. What was that? There was a recent article. What was it in? Which scientific publication they were discussing whether or not the Big Bang Theory needs to be revisited? It was based on the James Webb.
Yeah, I did see that.
Yeah.
I mean, Joe, it would be astonishing if that didn't happen.
Right.
Because, no theory in science is permanent.
Especially
fixed.
It's not like right now we have all the information we have the entire universe mapped out, every planet, everything. We know exactly what it is. We know exactly how old everything is. And we know for sure. We just have a limited ability to look, right?
Yeah, that's it. It's the limitations of our technology. So in the late 90s is when they discovered the universe is expanding at an accelerating rate. Well, how can that be? Because in an explosion, the initial explosion, the inflation in cosmology is really rapid, then it slows and slows and slows. And so it was supposed to slow down in, another 10 billion years or something and maybe collapse back on itself. And then they discover, oh my God, no, these type 2 supernova, whatever it was, indicate that the expansion is accelerating. So there's this weird force, dark energy, that pushes it away. And dark matter is this proffered thing that explains why galaxies are held together, because they don't have enough mass to hold them together in the structures that they are, as I understand it, and rotating the way they're rotating. So there's something else we can't see.
Right.
Now, so when astronomers talk about dark energy and dark matter to explain these two anomalies, like how could this be? That's not an explanation. It's just a linguistic placeholder until we figure out what it is.
Right.
So surely there is going to be some discoveries of some kind of new energy or some kind of matter that we don't know. Century from now, it's like, oh, of course, if you came back after being chronically frozen, oh, that's what it was. Oh.
So what would it take for you to look, I mean, what kind of discovery would it take in terms of UAPs for you to revisit your position and say it's highly likely that this is either something that we don't understand, that we are observing that's come from somewhere else, or something that we don't understand because it's technology that hasn't been released?
The actual specimen, the equivalent of the SR-71 Blackbird. I can go to the museum, I can see it, touch it, walk on it.
So do you hold it like, do you have like a placeholder, like perhaps?
Yeah, I do. I do. Nothing's 100%, right? No.
Why is it so fun, though, to think that it's from somewhere else? It's so much more fun to think that we're being visited than to think that our government has some super sophisticated, gravity propelling drones that somehow or another violate our laws of space-time. And why is it so much more exciting to think that?
I think it's a religious impulse. I think it's an idea that it feels like we're not alone. And when you think about the narratives from different religions, that there's something, an agent, a person, a being, of something, not just matter, not just the laws of nature. We're
Space
like,
Daddy.
Yeah, like when Einstein says, well, like Spinoza's God, it's just the laws of nature are God. It's like, that's not particularly comforting. It's like, well, they don't even know I'm here, right? But the idea that they're out there, they're super advanced, and they know we're here, maybe they're even coming. It's like the day the earth stood still, right? That was a kind of that film. That was a Christ allegory. Remember, his earthly name was Mr. Carpenter in that film, in the first one, the 1951 film.
Oh, right.
Klaatu. But his earthly name was Mr.
Baratu Niktu.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah.
And that was really a reflection of, and by the way, in the climax scene where the authorities kill him and they put him in the tomb. It's like the crucifixion of Jesus, and they put him in the tomb, and 3 days later he's resurrected. Well, and then she goes to the robot and says what you just said, Gort Klaatu Barada Nikto, and he goes there, burns a hole into the morgue, takes the body, takes it back to the spaceship, lays it on that slab, does some stuff with the lights, and he comes back to life. Now, in the original script, she, the Mary Magdalene character woman, says, Patricia Neal, you mean this is the power that extraterrestrials have? And in the original one, he goes, yeah, we have the power of life and death. And the Breen Censorship Board in 1950 said, no, you can't say that to the American public. That's,
really?
Yeah. So if you
the censorship board?
Yeah, there was a Breen Censorship Board that censored films that said, you can't defend religious people is one of their criteria.
Offend.
Yeah. So they changed.
You said defend.
Yeah, yeah. So they changed the script. Now he says something like, "Oh no, we don't have the power. Only the Great Spirit in the sky or something has that power."
I didn't know that there was a censorship board that would monitor films and say you can't say these things.
Same way we have it for ratings, PG
but it's
ratings,
science fiction.
Yeah.
They had censorship boards for science fiction, but they didn't for vampires.
Well, I mean, even Star Trek, the original series. I mean, Roddenberry had to sneak in a lot of anti-Vietnam War commentary through these characters, and had to be careful of how they were kind of presented, because censorship boards are like that. Captain Kirk, he always got the woman, but you never saw anything, right?
Right, but that's just
that's
how
normal.
things were back then. But I didn't know that they would have a censorship board that would say you can't offend religious people by saying that aliens have the power to bring things back from the dead.
Right, because there it kind of secularizes God. So in this scenario, I call this Shermer's Last Law, is one of my Scientific American columns. Any sufficiently advanced extraterrestrial intelligence would be indistinguishable from God.
Right.
Because they, as you went through the scenario earlier, 1,000 years more advanced than us, a million years more advanced than us. Look how far we've come in 100 years. Extrapolate that out. They'd be able to engineer life forms, probably even engineer entire planetary systems to create Dyson spheres to capture the light. All these fantastic scenarios. That would all be possible if you had a sufficient time and intelligence. How would that be any different from what religions think God is?
Well, wasn't there some sort of a recent experiment where they created an artificial life form that had, what was that thing? Do you know, we discussed this. It was, they had developed some sort of an artificial embryo. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah, some sort of an artificially created embryo. I think it even had a heartbeat.
Yes, that's right. And before that, an artificial genome.
Yes.
I mean, it's coming, Joe. It's coming.
Scientists grow synthetic embryo with brain and beating heart without eggs or sperm.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, and now extrapolate, go from here to 100,000 years of technology, as long as we don't blow ourselves up or have a super volcano kill us all. Scientists from University of Cambridge have created model embryos from mouse stem cells that form a brain, a beating heart, and the foundations of all other organs of the body. Pretty wild shit.
Well, it's just a molecular machine, life. And once you know the blueprint, you just print it out. You know? So we're getting there. It's a hard problem, but it's coming. And it may not happen in our lifetime. Ray Kurzweil's The Singularity's coming 2030, 2040, just take it out 2 centuries, right?
Yeah.
It's coming. Something like that is coming. And how would it be any different from what how religions describe God as an omniscient, omnipotent being?
Right, especially if you go a million years from now. A million years of evolution, we conceivably would have the power of gods.
Yeah, it's coming.
Yeah.
Assuming we live our lives long enough.
So if you think of a life form that exists out there, millions of light years away, that has achieved this sort of advanced technology, do you think that they would want to be visiting us and be interested in us with our nuclear power and all of our chaos and our territorial behavior and the fact that we have these thermonuclear weapons, we're pointing them at each other, and I think they'd be pretty interested. Or
in the plot of many of these, like The Day the Earth Stood Still, warning us, stop doing this, or else.
Or intervening. There's been discussions about them hovering over nuclear facilities.
Yes, I know about that, but that may be a selection bias of where the cameras are located or where the monitoring of that. Of course, we have more monitoring around our nuclear sites, missile sites, so that could just be an artifact of measurement. But nevertheless, your larger point, yes, maybe.
Yes, maybe.
Yes, maybe. This is
gotta be skeptical.
Well. Not in principle, just because you're a cynic or a nihilist. Not for that reason. The question is what should we believe? Justified true belief. What should I believe is true? Some things are true. Some things are not. I want to believe the correct things. How do I know? Right. So this is what science has kind of developed, science and rationality of over the centuries. Okay, so we know we're biased. We know we have to be careful about the confirmation bias and the hindsight bias and so on. So we have to set up some kind of system where it's not just me claiming it. You can look at it too. You can run the experiment. Here's how I did it. You do it. Right. And when that's not done, we have all kinds of problems like the replication crisis in psychology and medical science over the last decade or so. Some significant 2-digit percentage of these experiments can't be replicated, even though they went through peer-reviewed professional journals and they were done by professional scientists at real universities and so on. And so this is it's hard to know what to believe.
Well, there's also a problem of basing science on falsified studies, like the Alzheimer's issue that they're dealing with now. The whole amyloid plaque thing, where they found out that a lot of what is I don't want to butcher this because obviously I'm not a scientist, but there's a series of Alzheimer's drugs that were based on research that was falsified. And they're finding this out now. And this is a terrible thing for people that have, invested their health in these medications, people that have promoted these medications, that this was all based on falsified data.
Or how about the...
Find that, because that's pretty fascinating. Because here it is. This is a legitimate conspiracy. Neuroscience image sleuth finds signs of fabrication in scores of Alzheimer's articles threatening a reigning theory of the disease. That's terrifying to find out that the people that are responsible for doing these experiments falsified. Matthew Schrag, a neuroscientist and physician at Vanderbilt University, got a call that would plunge him into a maelstrom of possible scientific misconduct. A colleague wanted to connect him with an attorney investigating an experimental drug for Alzheimer's disease called Simoflam. The drug's developer, Cassava Sciences, claimed it improved cognition partly by repairing a protein that can block sticky brain deposits of the protein amyloid beta, a hallmark of Alzheimer's. The attorney's clients, 2 prominent neuroscientists who are also short sellers who profit if the company's stock falls, believe some research related to Simoflam may have been fraudulent, according to a petition later filed on the behalf of the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. So this is a huge scandal in medical science.
Right. And this one appears to be more fraud than just error.
Right.
Or bias.
Yeah. Right.
So, well,
that's horrible, right?
This is what whistleblowers are for. Often these things are exposed through insiders. I mean, almost always. Rare that a journalist from the outside discovers it. It's usually a grad student or something that's suspicious of what the mentor professor is doing. That's a problem, right? So that's why you have to disclose any, financial connections you have to companies that might be affiliated with a drug that could treat the thing you're studying, that sort of thing. And so there's more pressure to do that. There was another big meta-analysis on SSRIs, the antidepressants.
Yes.
Showing, big, massive meta-analysis. 50 years we've been prescribing these SSRIs for depression, and they do no better than nothing, or just chance, or just talking to friends or whatever.
Well, also that this idea that it's a chemical imbalance of the brain is not based on science.
Yeah, well, it's based on something, but it's probably incorrect science or
fraudulent.
I don't know if it's fraudulent. That's a pretty hefty charge to heave on a scientist. That's the end of their career. It's the end of their lives. If they get convicted of actual fraud, they'll never work again. That's different than making errors. And
well, this Alzheimer's thing is certainly based on fraud.
It looks like it.
And it looks like it was successful for decades.
Yeah.
Which is terrifying.
Yeah. Well, and, there's dozens of examples like this from, say, the last 50 years.
Sure.
But it's still rare, and usually scientists that figure it out and then call them out.
Yeah,
so
ultimately.
I like to think of it that it works reasonably well, right? I mean, we find out about the errors, the mistakes. I mean, creationists always used to point out the errors that evolutionary biologists made, therefore God did it, right? The theory is not sound, right? But it was always scientists that disclosed that the error was made by another scientist.
Different scientists do have, there is an incentive to uncover these things.
Right. So now there's a movement afoot to kind of have scientists say ahead of time, post on these websites, this is the experiment I'm going to do. Here's exactly what I'm going to do. I will report all of the data. So then you avoid the file drawer problem, where you only publish the successful ones, the rest go in the file drawer that were not successful. So this, a lot of major journals will not publish replication experiments. They're not interested in that. They want cutting edge new research. Well, this is a problem because, again, if you have this theory and no one can replicate it, but no one wants to publish the non-replication because it's not interesting, then you can go down this rabbit hole of an error perpetrating for decades.
How can they mitigate these problems?
Well, that would be one way, just transparency.
Right. But how could they mitigate the issue of a lack of transparency? Is it funding? Is it promotion of these?
Okay, so some of the publisher parish pressure leads. There's studies on why scientists commit fraud, and it's again like conspiracies. It's not a big grand thing. It's just like wants to get tenure.
Right.
Just keep his job. I remember one of the most interesting podcasts you had with Edward Snowden, and you guys were talking about conspiracies, and he starts talking about, let me tell you how it really works. Behind closed doors, it's just bureaucrats trying to keep their job, right? So they're ramping up the threat of terrorism because if we don't have a threat, then we're going to lose our funding, right? So very narrow. I just want to keep our funding for our department. And a lot of science works that way. Without let's say, external private money, there's a massive competition for public government money for research, and that leads to these. I'll just report the positive ones, or I'll kind of throw out these data points because they're too extreme, and that'll bring my p-value level to where I need it. It's called p-hacking. And, the p-value is the probability of it being chance rather than a real effect. And it's set at 0.05 or 0.01, and maybe you're at 0.06. You go, well, I got this outlier data point here, so I'm just going to not count that. Then all of a sudden now your p-value is at 0.04. Oh, I'm in. Now I can publish it. This used to happen a lot. Now there's pressure like no p-hacking, right?
P-hacking.
So it's kind of the shift in norms. Like in journalism is kind of going through this now. Where's the fact checkers and the editors of the editors, and the editors should have editors, right?
Right.
And because too much gets published.
Right. Who's managing the managers?
Yeah, or like just think about like the Kyle Rittenhouse story, right? And there's a bunch like that it fit a certain narrative, so it got published as a certain way, and then it's like, weeks later, months later, when they dig into it, it's like, okay, well, that was misinterpreted. Why did that happen? Right? Or the kitty litter boxes in schools from last week. That got spread around as a meme because it kind of fit the conservative view of, liberals and their confusion about gender and sex and
But the kitty litter boxes is a weird one.
It is weird. It's it's more like an urban legend.
I fed into that, and I should probably clarify that a little bit. I have a friend, and my friend's wife is a school teacher, and she told him that there was discussions in the school that a mother wanted to put a litter box in one of the bathrooms. And he told me this, and I talked about it on here, and then people were saying, that's not true, it's an internet rumor. So I contacted him again, and I said, tell me exactly what she said, and contact her and find out. She no longer works for that school. She works for another school. She contacted the other school. She didn't get a response. I don't think they actually did it. I think there was discussions about doing it because there was one particularly wacky mother, but it doesn't seem that there's any proof that they put a litter box in there. The reason why I was interested in it and willing to entertain it was there was about 10 years or so ago, we went to, there was a UFC in Pittsburgh. And when we went there, as we landed, we were driving from the airport to the hotel, we see all these people with mascot outfits on. We're like, what is going on? And we talked to this guy, and he said, there's a furry convention in town.
Oh, right.
And I said, wow, this is crazy. So they all decided to get together. So they were at bars and on the streets, and it was like a get-together. They used to do it in San Diego, but at the time, San Diego was a little bit more conservative, and they were having a hard time doing it, so they moved it to Pittsburgh. And this was the year they moved it to Pittsburgh. This is according to him. So we check into the hotel. The hotel, the guy who was working the front desk was saying how crazy it was. That these folks were asking for their food to be delivered in bowls on the ground so they could eat it like animals. And I'm like, that is crazy. And then he said they asked for a litter box in the lobby. Now, they didn't put a litter box into the lobby, but someone, according to this man, asked him for a litter box. I'm like, that is crazy. So I went and did a deep dive online. I went to forums where furries go because I was trying to find, like, is this a thing? Do they like to use litter boxes? Out of all of my searching, I could only find one poster, one guy who said he had used a litter box. So this one person who was saying that he thought it was kinky and he liked to use it, he, they, it, them, whatever, liked to use a litter box. So that was all I could find. So is that something that people do, or is it something that people talk about doing because it's fun? I don't know. But one of the things that I found about these furries is, like, it's sexual in some sort of weird way. They like to get together and have sex with their furry outfits on, and they don't want people to know who they are or what they want to keep the outfits on.
So it's a cosplay kind of thing.
Yeah, it's like a cosplay kink thing that some people engage in. Like, how that got connected to gender, I do not understand, because it seems to be a completely different sort of kink. But what I think people have concern with is that it's nonsense and that it's crazy. And if this nonsense starts getting into schools, because there are, Jamie, what was the thing that you were telling me? There was someone was telling you about one kid thinks they're a wolf, and they.
I honestly don't know if I still need to. I think they're trolling. I think there's something that happened on TikTok it got out of hand.
In that film, What Is a Woman?
There was that one person that said that they were a wolf.
Yeah, I mean, you can always find somebody.
There is a report from ABC though, where they went and talked to a bunch of younger kids and parents that were having like a meeting, and they're like, "Our kids like to dress up and talk this way, but like you should see how different they are when they do it."
Right.
They went from being very reserved to like outgoing and.
Right, because it allows them to, when they pretend that they're a wolf, they can just be freer. So maybe they're like very shy, introverted kids, and this allows them like some form of escapism. Yeah, like you said, like a cosplay type thing.
Yeah, but so what happens then is, so there's an element of truth to the, and this is true with conspiracy theories, always a little element of truth, and then it gets blown up into something else. And then if it gets politicized, that's just the sort of thing those libtards would do in these schools. They're trying to groom our children.
Right.
Right. then you get a moral panic. It's like the satanic panic of the 1980s. Started with that McMartin preschool case in Manhattan Beach.
Yes, we'll talk about that because that's pretty crazy.
Totally crazy. So this was kind of in the time in psychology where Freudianism, sort of unconscious memories of things and so on, were becoming popular. And there was this idea that there's a lot of molestation and secret satanic cults all over America, and there's a lot of these kind of preschools. So the McMartin preschool case was based on children telling these fantastic stories about the stuff that was going on at the day school. Now, you have kids, I have kids. It's like, how this is impossible for parents not to know this. Oh, they have tunnels, underground tunnels where they have horses. They take them out to Catalina, and they do these satanic things to them. And what, the parents, no one noticed this? Right?
And they were kind of coaching the kids when they were asking the kids these questions, like, what did they do? Did they do this? And the kids are like, yeah.
Remember the anatomically correct dolls? Now,
show me where
he touched you, right? And worse, they separate the kids from their parents. The mom's outside, and the little kid's scared to death in this room.
Yeah.
And then he's like, okay, he touched me there. Can I go back to my mommy now?
Right.
Like,
and then this ruined people's lives and careers, and these people were accused of these horrible things that it turns out they did not do.
They didn't do. Before the O.J. trial, this was the longest and most expensive trial in California history, that McMartin preschool case. But it launched this kind of satanic panic around America. There's one of these cults in every city. And finally, the FBI got involved and said, all right, we better look into this. And they found nothing. Okay, you can always find some weirdo who's a Satanist, right? And maybe they do some weird things with a cat or something. Or a cat gets mutilated by a dog, and then you got the Satanist, he's over there, and then the mutilated cat was found over there. There must be some connection, and before you know it, you get this spiraling moral panic.
Right.
And it was similar to the recovered memory movement in the 90s, that when we started in 92, we started covering this because it was the same kind of thing where these were adult, mostly women, going into therapy for various issues, sleep problems, depression, weight issues, whatever. And the therapists who had bought in all this Freudian stuff that you suppress your memories, and we can get them out as if memory is like a video recording, and you can watch it on the little Cartesian theater of your mind, as if there's a little homunculus in there looking at the screen. Okay, play back for me what your father did. Now, they don't start off like that. They just go, okay, so what are your issues? And the client says what the issues are. Well, some people that have those symptoms were molested when they were children. Well, no, that didn't happen to me. Well, I know you don't think it happened to you. But in fact, we know about repressed memories, that you repress the memory of that trauma because it's so traumatic. Really? Yeah. How do I know? Okay, have you ever had a dream or ever had fleeting thoughts about this, and this? Yeah, I think I might have. So 6 months later, now the person thinks, I think this actually happened to me.
Right.
And then there's this big moment of confrontation with the father, grandfather, uncle, whoever it is. And, of course, they're just in a state of shock, like this is horrible. And then it got worse where they were actually put on trial for...
Yes.
And some of these guys were convicted based on nothing other than one of these recovered memories.
Yeah, that's a real issue with hypnotic regression, right? You can introduce thoughts into people's minds. That was an issue with John Mack's work. You aware of John Mack?
Yeah, oh yeah.
John Mack, who was a psychologist out of Harvard, he wrote a book called Abduction, I believe
Abducted,
it was.
yeah.
Abducted. And it was all about UFO abductees.
Right.
And it was a similar situation where they were using hypnotic regression. And the problem was the way the questions were formulated and the way these hypnotic regression sessions were conducted, a lot of people thought was extremely unscientific and, in fact, could have introduced these ideas. Because, one of the things was oh, this is a uniform tale that everyone keeps telling. Okay, well, do you have the same person asking these people these questions? And how are they doing this? Right. And do they have a vested interest? Like perhaps maybe they're publishing a book? Do they have a vested interest in trying to make this a narrative? And it turns out, yeah, that seems to be the case. That they were asking these people these very leading questions and taking them through these hypnotic regression sessions, and they were all convinced that they were abducted by aliens.
Yeah, the pioneering researcher on this, Elizabeth Loftus, a psychologist, studies memory. She made famous these studies of where you show people like a video of a car accident, and you ask one group, how fast would you estimate the cars were traveling when they collided? The second group, how fast would you estimate the cars were traveling when they smashed into each other? The latter one gets a higher estimated speed. Or you show subjects a little 30-second video clip of like somebody sitting on a park bench and some guy walks up and grabs her purse and runs off. All right, what color was his hat? Oh, it was a blue hat, it was a baseball hat, it was a knit cap, and so on. The guy wasn't wearing a hat at all. Right, so just asking the question plants in now the memory is corrupted. Now the person thinks the person had a hat. That's the new memory, right?
Right.
Her most famous research was on the Lost in a Mall. So these are adult subjects who had been screened, and they know that when they were children, they were never lost in a mall, right? But they introduced, amongst many things that they were talking about, do you remember the time when you were 5, because your parents told us about this, when you were lost in the mall? Oh, yes. Oh, my God. It was terrible. I was so scared. And then I remember hearing the voice of my mom. And then this guy helped me, and he was wearing this flannel shirt. And he took me to my mommy and so on. And so they just make up this complete – it never happened.
Right.
She just made that up on the spot. So we have this little internal storyteller to try to make sense of this chaotic world. And so the moment you get new information, you got to try to fit it somewhere in there. What's the narrative? How does this fit with my life?
Well, this goes back to what we were talking about with chaotic events and eyewitness testimony.
Yeah.
It's always screwed up.
Not reliable.
Not reliable at all.
No. And so what do we do about it? Because in the criminal justice system, back to our signal detection problem, right? You got the guy sitting there. Is he guilty? If he's really guilty and you find him guilty, then that's good. That's a hit, right? But if he's really innocent and you find him guilty, that's really bad, right? So we have this kind of what's called the Blackstone ratio of 10 to 1. Better 10 guilty people go free than that one innocent person be found guilty. Yeah. And so the criminal justice system has the same problem. Before DNA and some of that forensic evidence, it was all eyewitness, and it's terrible. So the Innocence Project has, as you know, exonerated, 300 and something people, many of them on death row for crimes they never committed. And that's the problem. Even like forensic stuff you see on CSI, the bite marks or the hair analysis or the fabric, even that's not very well tested and replicated.
No, in fact, Josh Dubin, who worked with the Innocent Project, talked about that. And he has a podcast on junk science and particularly discuss bite marks, about how you can tell people that it was a bite mark from a specific individual and they'll go with it. And then you can show them that absolutely is not the case. And, this is not like DNA evidence. It's not like something that is absolutely 100% true.
Even the polygraph, there's a reason it's not allowed in.
Oh, the polygraph's horseshit.
It's total horseshit.
Yeah, that's horseshit. When someone tells you they passed a lie detector test, like, congratulations, you're a sociopath.
That's right.
It doesn't fucking mean anything.
If you believe it,
yeah,
you're not going to give up the cues.
Also, like, you have to have a very specific response to like this question, and everyone's response to stimuli and stress, they vary. Some people are going to react in a certain way, but that's not indicative of evidence. Like, you can absolutely prove. Also, like, there was a woman who was convicted, I believe, in India from fMRI data of a murder because she had knowledge of the crime scene. And so, like, I discussed this with a neuroscientist in America, and she was like, that is absolutely not evidence that person committed the crime. But if you are in a trial and you have knowledge of the crime scene because they've told you this is the case, this is what they're saying happened, and then they use this fMRI data to show that you have knowledge of the crime. Well, of course you have knowledge of the crime. You're about to go to fucking jail for something you didn't do, and they're telling you, it was Colonel Mustard in the library with a candlestick. Like, oh, look, through MRI data, we can show she knows about Colonel Mustard.
Right.
So I believe this woman was actually convicted.
There are people, neuroscientists, trying to figure out how to use MRIs to see if you can see if somebody's lying.
Yeah.
I think we're a long ways from that.
A long ways.
And I did a TV show once, 20 years ago for Fox Family, Exploring the Unknown, and we did an episode on the polygraph. So we found this guy, Doug Smith, who was now working. He was a former cop in Dallas, and he was working with defense attorneys, showing why the polygraph is bullshit. So he had the funniest story where he said, first day on the job, he got the training on how to do the polygraph. So his first day is his boss says, "Okay, we got the accused in there. We think he's the perpetrator. Go in there and do the polygraph test." So he does the thing. He comes back. "Well, boss, I think he's lying." And he goes, "Yeah, we know he's lying. They're all lying. Get in there and get the confession." He's like, "What?" Yeah. Tell him we know he's lying, and tell him we got his fingerprints too. You mean you just, yeah. It's like, oh
Jesus
my God.
Christ.
Yeah. So now, he gave up because he thought, oh, you mean this is like planting evidence in a way.
Okay, so this is in a way, right?
This is my type specimen for what I call proxy conspiracists. That is, conspiracies. That is, they're a stand-in for something else. The OJ case. OJ was acquitted based on a conspiracy theory that the LAPD planted the bloody glove and the blood splatter and so forth, and the jury accepted it. Now, the evidence is pretty overwhelming. He killed his wife and her friend, and there was no police tampering. There was the one guy, Furman, who was probably a racist, but it wasn't clear that he did anything. But my explanation is that in a way the jury, said, yeah, maybe not this time, but the LAPD have done these sorts of things.
Right.
And there's this great ESPN documentary series called OJ in America. And it's like 6 hours long, and it tracks the history of the African-American community post-World War II coming to Southern California and how bad the relationships were between the LAPD and the African-American community, particularly right in downtown L.A. And they did plant evidence. They did do things like that, right? So there's an element of truth, back to conspiracism.
I think there's some evidence that Furman did plant some evidence. Or if it wasn't for Furman, that there was some evidence that something was planted, whether it was blood splatter or something. And they use this excuse that they know he's guilty. And so since they know he's guilty, it sort of justifies that falsification.
That was
of
the
evidence.
argument in the 50s and 60s. Well, I don't know if this guy did it. He's done something.
Right.
And if he gets off, he's going to commit another crime. So we're doing the justice thing here by planning it. Okay, so enough of that has happened that it's reasonable for African Americans to be suspicious. Same thing with their higher rates of vaccine hesitancy now. Recently, anyway, because of the Tuskegee experiments, where our government did do these things, right? The syphilis patients that were not treated when they could have been, without their consent, without their knowledge, just so.
Right.
I mean, it's Nazi-like experiments. Let's see what happens if we don't treat them.
And it went on for decades.
It went on for decades, and
terrifying
most
stuff.
of them died. Their spouses got syphilis.
Yeah.
Their children, some of them got. It's terrible, and it's the kind of thing that Nazi, doctors were doing. And you know about Operation Paperclip, right? Because you had Annie Jacobson on the show. She's really good on these things. Her books are just first-class good journalism on that, where she tracked down, if you put a paperclip on the file, it means we're going to adopt this guy as one of our scientists before the Russians. These are German scientists, before the Russians get him, right?
Right.
And a lot of these guys were doing, chemical warfare experiments, biological warfare experiments, and of course Wernher von Braun with the V-2 rockets, the most famous of the paperclip experiments. So enough of that goes on. It's like, wait a minute. On the one hand, we're trying these guys at the Nuremberg trials and executing them for war crimes. And then we have these other guys that did pretty much the same thing. Yeah. But now they work for us.
Yeah.
So there's enough of that. You go, you know what?
That was a crazy one because they were just justifying it based on, listen, we're in the middle of a Cold War with Russia, and if we don't get these people, the Russians are going to get them. And yes, they are Nazis, but they're also very advanced scientists, and they have research that could benefit us and our rocket programs and a lot of our other scientific experiments. It's pretty wild shit when you find out that it's true.
The guy who invented sarin gas, he was a German chemist, and he lived in...
Fritz Haber.
Yeah. No, not Fritz Haber.
No, Fritz Haber was the other gas.
The other guy. Yeah, the other gas. Mustard gas.
He invented that, and he also invented the Haber method of extracting nitrogen.
Right.
So they wanted him for crimes against humanity while he was also up for the Nobel Prize for extracting nitrogen from the atmosphere.
Same thing with like Linus Pauling, was one of the great scientists of all time, won 2 Nobel Prizes, one for peace, one for chemistry, and he was spied on by the FBI, and he was not allowed to go. Well, he was allowed to go collect his 1 Nobel Prize, but he couldn't go to some conferences because they thought he might be a communist and all this stuff because he was anti-nuclear war.
That was during the Red Scare.
Yeah.
Yeah, during the 50s, right?
So again, you think, wait a minute, our government was doing this? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, maybe I should be suspicious about current stuff, right?
Well, that's also the MK Ultra experiments. There's so many people that were involved in that like one of them was Ted Kaczynski. He was involved in the Harvard LSD experiments.
Right.
And wound up being, a horrible murderer.
Right.
And who knows what they did to his fucking brain. while they were dosing him up with LSD and running these abusive studies on him.
Has that been confirmed by his brother? His brother?
Yeah. They did not only did that. He had a horrible background.
I thought he was schizophrenic.
That too,
okay.
yeah. Well, when he was a child, he had some sort of an ailment where they took him from his parents and they put him in an orphanage or some sort of a children's hospital where when he was a baby, he had no contact with human beings. He would just cry in his crib. They would feed him and that's it. And this went on for months. And they think that just that development really fucked up his brain. And then on top of that, he goes to Harvard and he's involved in the LSD experiments. And apparently those experiments were very abusive because they were studying like what would happen if you give these people LSD and you emotionally and psychologically abuse them. And, he had, according to his brother, all sorts of real problems with relationships and other human beings, like just a really damaged human being overall.
Did you see Earl Morris's film Wormwood about the Frank Olson case?
I did not heard about it, but I didn't see it.
It's quite good. It's a little long. Netflix is cranking out these really long documentary series.
They know how to drag you in and keep you there.
I'm 2 hours in and I still have no idea what's going on. Come on, get to the point. Yeah. So this was Frank Olson's one of the chemists that worked in the MK Ultra program, but they dosed him. He's just at some bar and some club with the other CIA guys, and they said, "Hey, let's put some LSD." and and then like 10 days later, he jumps out of a New York City high-rise window, or did he? And there was evidence that there was a couple of CIA guys that were there. Maybe they pushed him, and then his son Eric Olson, who's been kind of keeping the story alive. This happened in the 50s. Had the body exhumed and there was evidence of like a blow to the head, like a crack in the skull, like they hit him first and then shoved him out the window.
Oh wow!
But maybe he hit his head. It's like, and Seymour Hersh was the journalist that they kind of tried to track this down, and they couldn't quite get the CIA to admit. The CIA paid him off. They gave him, I think, $750,000. But they said, but no guilt. We're not going to say we did anything. It's like
this is the problem with conspiracies, right? That some of them are real.
Right. Yeah, and so when you have someone like Alex Jones, when he was on your show, and I show a clip of this to my class actually last night, where he's ranting on about NASA has this headquarters in San Francisco where they're dosing people to talk to the aliens. He goes off on something, right? But that the CIA was dosing people with, hallucinogenic drugs.
Right.
That's true.
Yeah.
Right. And so this is the problem with conspiracy theories: is they start off with some element of truth. Yeah, there's some facts there. Okay. And I was talking to Megyn Kelly about this because she came here to Austin, met with Alex, did a whole show when she was with NBC on Alex Jones. Remember that? And then she got a lot of heat for talking to him and letting him speak, as you did. But she said, she has a team of fact checkers at NBC. And they go, okay, let's just fact check everything he said. And it's like, you know what? Pretty much everything he said starts off with some little thing. Well, that's actually true. Right. And then he spins it off into something else, and this is the problem with conspiracism.
Well, it's also the problem with, like, if you're going to find all these different conspiracies, how much time do you have? How much time do you have to investigate all of these in a very thorough manner? There's almost impossible. It's almost impossible to get to the bottom of every single one of those and have an objective analysis of the facts. Where I was talking about Tom O'Neill, the book Chaos, where he covered Manson. He wrote that book for 20 years. 20 years on one case. He started off, he was hired to do a article. I forget what magazine it was for, but whatever publication it was for, it was the anniversary of the Manson case. So he was just supposed to do this little thing about the case. And so as he's a really good journalist, and as he goes into this story, he keeps uncovering more and more evidence of fuckery, more and more evidence of just a bunch of weird shit, and becomes obsessed. It takes him 20 years to eventually publish that book, and the book is phenomenal. I can't recommend it enough.
Okay,
because Tom O'Neill is a really good journalist, and the book Chaos is riveting.
I mean, even this, that's already long enough, right?
Right.
And I just barely touched the surface.
I like how you can connect.
Oh, by the way,
the word
conspiracy. It also has a CIA and SOROS, Soros. It's all in there. Yeah.
Well, when you talk to like schizophrenics and they make those maps of all the connections that people, this person met that person who met that person who met this person who was in the same airport as that person in 1969, so therefore they're involved with this, that, and the other thing. It's like...
Well, the JFK, for that chapter, that took me a long time to write because, again, it's just down the rabbit hole. There's thousands of books. Even Bugliosi's book, I mean, 1,400 pages. Holy crap, guy. Come on.
Yeah, that's a lot.
And then you get into
remembering it all when you're on page 900. What the fuck did he say on page 100? You got to go back.
Or the 9/11 truth. Once you go down there, what do I know about explosive devices and how buildings are demolished?
Someone had a really good point the other day. They were talking to me about this person who was involved in construction. And they were saying, let me explain to you construction in New York City. When they say that plane could have never taken down those buildings, he goes, when these people, he goes, and I'm not accusing these people of doing it, but I've seen it with my own eyes. When you're supposed to use half-inch steel, if you use quarter-inch steel, it's a lot less money. And then there's a lot of this and a lot of skimping here and a lot of there's a lot of corruption.
Oh, interesting. Right.
And he was saying, he goes, they're seeing that in Russia with a lot of the Russian, someone else was explaining this to me, that a lot of these Russian weapons, they're faulty. And one of the reasons why they're faulty is because there's corruption. And the people that are responsible for making them are skimming. They're taking, you're supposed to spend X amount of money. We don't have to fucking... And so a lot of the shit doesn't even work correctly because of corruption. Because there's a bunch of people that are involved that are, they're profiting in an absurd way.
His point was that the World Trade Center buildings were maybe not up to code.
Exactly.
I see.
That they weren't made the way they were supposed to be made.
Yeah. Well, they probably weren't designed to be able to withstand a plane hit from two commercial airliners full of gas.
For sure. Yeah. I remember I was visiting this guy who was a doctor, and this is back when you had to get a medical marijuana license in California. Yeah. So he was that kind of doctor. I was going to him, and he gives me this book. And he was very loony. And he gives me this book saying that the World Trade Center towers were brought down by Tesla energy. And I'm like, what? And he was like, he goes, yeah, there's no way to turn concrete into dust. And the way these buildings, I go, but what about if when concrete like smashes, it's made out of fucking powder that you mix with water, wouldn't it just become dust? And so I'm like breaking down this argument with this guy in the office while I'm trying to get a license for medical marijuana. I'm like, I got to get my life together. Like, what the fuck kind of conversations am I having? Because this guy like was imploring me to read this book. I'm like, oh boy, that it was Tesla technology that they used some sort of a thing.
Again, a big event like 9/11, we need a big cause. Ooh, Tesla Energy, that sounds pretty good. For Skeptic, we did an issue on that, which we commissioned an article from a guy that runs a demolition company. This is what he does. He brings big buildings down. And he said, let me tell you how it's done. I mean, you got to go in there, break down all the drywall, get into the support beams, wrap them up. There's no way this could have happened at the World Trade Center buildings.
Right.
Well, no one noticed. People in there
no one noticed that you're constantly putting these detonators everywhere. Yeah, that was the weird argument about Tower 7 too, right? People were saying, look, Tower 7, it felt like a controlled demolition. And it did. It fell like a controlled demolition. But if you see the full video of how it went down, the inside of it collapsed long before the whole building collapsed. There was evidence that it was falling apart.
And it burned all day.
Well, yeah, it burned all day, and there was diesel generators in the basement. So there's all this diesel fuel that was on fire. So you got extraordinary heat that's weakening the entire structure of this building for hours and hours. And there's evidence that it collapsed at the top. So everyone's like, oh, the way it fell, it was uniformly. Yeah, but it already was falling apart. Like, the whole thing was on fire.
You know what really bothers me about a lot of these is it kind of distracts us from real shenanigans that are probably going on. Like, what was the relationship between the United States government and the Saudi government?
Right.
Where was that money? Who funded those 9/11 hijackers? And
right.
So
why
on.
were the Saudi nationals allowed to leave
the next day? Yeah, it's like that was. Why are we not talking about that?
Right. Right. That's real conspiracies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Same thing again with the JFK paper. Why aren't they releasing them? I suspect it's because the CIA was up to some other things we don't want other countries to know that we were doing.
I'm sure there's some of that. There's always some of that, right? I mean, that's the way they operate. And who knows if that's for our own good or if it's for their good.
I mean, there's a reason Castro was tagged as maybe one of the assassins, because we tried to kill him
multiple times.
Multiple times.
Try to use exploding cigars
and the seashell conch with a bomb in it where he scuba dives.
I remember when they started the embargo with Cuba, when they wouldn't let you get Cuban goods. Before they did it, Kennedy famously got boxes and boxes of cigars sent to him. I'm like, you motherfucker. Like, you motherfucker. Like, I enjoy a cigar as much as the next guy, but Jesus Christ.
It's like Governor Newsom.
Yeah.
You got to stay home.
For thee, but not for me.
You got to stay home. But I'm going to this nice, fresh restaurant.
Yeah. But don't worry. I'll be outside.
That's right.
Yeah.
Or Boris Johnson.
You know, there was a state trooper that took the photo of him.
Oh, it was?
Yeah,
no,
it was
I
a
didn't know
state
that.
trooper who was on detail.
Right.
We took the photo of him, and it was like, you motherfucker.
Right.
Making everybody wear a mask, and you're in there eating at the French Laundry.
Right.
Yeah. But that's always the case with people in power. They'll come up with things that look good in terms of optics, and like, these are the measures that we're going to take, and everyone has to abide by them, except for me. I'm Nancy Pelosi. I want to get my hair done.
Right. Here's one of my own pet conspiracy theories. When you get elected president, they take you in a back room and they go, okay, here's what's actually going on. Well, but I said I was going to close Gitmo. Yeah, you're not going to do that. Oh, yeah, I guess I can't do that. I was going to pull the troops out. No, we can't pull the troops out.
What do you think really happens? Do you think they're just lying when they're making their campaign speeches, then they have no intention of doing those things?
I don't think they know, because until you're the nominee, until you're the head nominee and it's close, are you allowed to know what's really going on, right?
No way.
I mean, I think when Obama won, when he actually won the election, I think that's when they gave him the, whatever they call them, the white papers, the debriefing papers, from the National Security Agency and so on. And I'm pretty sure it's like he had all this list of stuff. This is what I'm going to do.
Right.
And it's like, I can't actually do those things because, all right, so we close Gitmo, then this happens, then this happens.
Right.
Remember, you wanted to impose the what was it, in nuclear weapons? No launch on warning, LOW, no launch on warning because it's too risky. And he said, I'm going to do this. And then it never happened. And I think our NATO allies said, no, we want the Russians to think we may just strike at any moment, and not just defensively. And no first use. No, that was it. That was the first. No first use. And he didn't do it. He won the Nobel Peace Prize for his stance on nuclear weapons and then didn't do that.
Yeah,
why? And I think because our NATO allies said, this is in the treaty. You got to do this. If you don't do that, then the Russians are going to do this, and so on, back and forth. Like,
someone actually should bring that up during presidential debates. Like, you have no idea what's going on until you get in there, sir.
Right.
So why even saying that?
Right.
Because and then point to the fact that every single president that's ever said they were going to do all these things, once they get in office and they get the information.
Yeah, so here's where I'm conflicted about. I'm a big free speech guy. Transparency is key. But I'm sure there are national security secrets that it's probably good we don't know, right?
Yeah.
This is the world we live in. We live in a
right. It's complex.
And there are bad people.
Yeah.
Okay, so my favorite film is A Few Good Men. Jack Nicholson is schooling Tom Cruise on the stand. Son, we live in a world with walls, and on those walls are men with guns, and you want me on that wall. You need me on that wall.
Yeah.
And so on. It's like, yeah, he's right. Actually,
he is right.
And that script was written to kind of parody the conservative militarist position, but in fact, it is correct.
Yeah.
Right. It'd be better if we lived in a world without political borders and guns and so on.
And bad people.
But that's not the world we live in.
Yeah, but you just can't imagine that they don't exist and operate as if they don't, because then you put us all in danger.
And this is what my question for Elon Musk when we, colonize Mars. What are we going to do there? What kind of government? What kind of an economy? How many people are you going to have? Do you have to have police? Do you have to have laws? Because his attitude is, just minimize laws. We're all just going to, just as this direct democracy, everybody votes, minimum laws, because that's where things get. Yeah, okay. If you have 12 people, that probably works. But if you have 1,200 or 12 million people,
do you think Earth is going to be the new United States? Like, the United States was a civilization, or was a country rather, that was started because people were fed up with the way things were run in Europe, and they said, well, we're going to go over here, we're going to Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, and we're going to establish this, this land of the free. And, it worked out pretty well for a long time.
Yeah.
And, as time goes on, it gets more and more complex and more fucked up.
Is it inevitable that government bureaucracies just grow? They just can't not grow, and they get more complex, and you need more rules and laws, and then you need guns and jails, and
it seems like it is.
It's just, I mean, you can have as many checks and balances as you can just to keep the growth in check, not too much.
Right.
But it seems like if you started with 10 people at Mars, and then you had 1,000, and then 10,000, and then 100,000, and then 1,000,000, you're going to end up with lawyers,
yep,
and courts, and mediators, and police, and
so what's the solution to that? How do you mitigate that completely?
You don't. I don't think, because of human nature, right? We're naturally selfish. It's part of our nature, and we're avarice, and we're greedy, and it's who we are.
I wonder if the solution to that is some sort of an integration with technology. That's what I wonder, if things like Neuralink and these new proposed technologies that will increase the bandwidth of the human mind, and I wonder if those, if those perhaps will come with an ability to read thoughts and minds and to communicate telepathically, which is what I think ultimately, when we talk about the evolution of the human body and, the human animal from, lower primate to what we are today, we assume that it's going to be a biological evolution from here on out, but it might not be. It might be symbiotic. We might be connected to some technology, which seems inevitable.
There's another argument from the SETI people, is that if we encounter aliens, they're probably not going to be biological.
Right, but they've moved past that.
Yeah.
Well, that's the fear of artificial intelligence, right? The fear of artificial intelligence that has become sentient and it has no use for us.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. Let's think about that for a second, because when you say, well, the AA will want to conquer us or want to control us, wanting is a human emotion.
Yes.
Why would a computer have wants?
Yes, that's a really good point. Like, why would it have desires and needs? And all of those are based on biological needs, like these primate desires that we have to acquire wealth and status, and to have breeding rights, and all the things that motivate people, greed and ego, that motivate people to do what they do now. The artificial intelligence, unless we program that into it, won't have that. And if they are sentient, if they're sentient and far more intelligent than us, it seems to me that would be the thing that they would realize right away is a real problem with the programming. Like, why do we have all this nonsense, ego, and all these needs to acquire things and control things? Why is that baked in? Like, why do we even need to communicate with people? If sentient artificial intelligence was really far more intelligent than us, why would it even talk to us?
Right.
Why wouldn't it just exist?
Right. This is my argument for why I don't fear making contact with extraterrestrials. There's the argument that we shouldn't try to communicate with them or send signals out, because look what happened historically when an advanced civilization came in contact with a less advanced civilization. They enslaved them or genocide or so on. But I don't think you could get to the point where you have a interstellar civilization and you have Dyson spheres and you have massive, super advanced technology and so on, and still be colonial, enslaving people, genocidal maniacs. I don't think you could get there with that kind of attitude.
Yeah, I don't think so either. Do you think that the only thing that separates the biological organism from this advanced creature, the only way to get past that, because everything that evolves biologically evolves in a state of competition, right? I mean, there's a reason why it advances and improves. It's natural selection, and there's a lot going on there. Would that be the only way that we could get past all of these bizarre human emotions and ego and greed and need, is to separate ourselves from biological evolution and become...
Yeah. In a way, that's what we've been doing, I think, through the last several centuries of moral progress. Just take my previous book, The Moral Arc, or Steve Pinker's books, talking about the shift in norms of what is acceptable behavior has been massive in the long run, right?
Right.
I mean, they used to, burn cats and slavery and the death penalty and torture, and this was common. And people just, burning witches, burning women as witches. This was common, and now it's not. Why? What happened? Our nature didn't change. There's no biological evolution. We just kind of learned to channel our inner our better angels and kind of suppress our inner demons.
Yeah.
Through not just laws, top-down laws you probably have to have, but we don't really need laws now to prevent slavery from happening. I mean, it's just pretty much no government's going to say, hey, I got this great idea, let's enslave people. The norms have shifted, that pretty much nobody wants to do that, right? And that has driven a lot of human progress. without having to do the biological evolution or genetic engineering or reprogramming. Because you don't want to take out somebody's sense of, I don't know, pride and avarice, and I want to be successful, I want to make money, I want to be creative, I have these drives. And there's a dark side to that. Maybe you're also a little bit of psychopath and you're kind of mean and nasty in your competitiveness. But if you take all that away, then what's the motive to do anything? Why would you want anything?
Right. Why would you?
I think we're stuck with both, right? So we have to engineer it culturally from the bottom up by changing norms.
I think that is happening. And that's one of the reasons why, when things happen like this sort of social progress movement and social justice movement, the reason why I think that's a good thing is like maybe it goes too far in some ways, but the direction of it, the thought process behind it is making the world a fairer, better place, which I think is ultimately good. And there's going to be it's not a perfect thing because humans aren't perfect. So there's the waves, the ebbs and the flows. There's an overreach and then there's a correction. And I think that if you look at Pinker's work, and one of the pushbacks on Pinker's work is, Pinker says that the world is safer, it's better in so many ways now than it's ever been before. And people will say, "What? How can you say this when there's all this crime and injustice and racism and murder and rape and thievery and all this shit that's going on?" Yes, 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 yes. That's not denial of all the horrors and atrocities that exist currently. But if you look at the grand scale of what the world was like during Genghis Khan's reign versus the world is like today, it's far safer than it's ever been before. This is the best time to be alive ever, even though things are still relatively fucked up in comparison to utopia.
Utopia is a terrible goal to have because we're never going to get there. And also, it gives a perverse calculation that, we can achieve this perfect society in which everybody is happy forever if it weren't for those people right there.
Right.
And
that's our enemy. We got to get rid of
the
them.
Jews, the Catholics, the Mormons, whoever
the capitalists,
the kids,
everybody, whoever it is. Yeah. Find an enemy, find an other.
Right. Yeah. So how about this is what Kevin Kelly calls protopia, not utopia, protopia. Just make tomorrow just a little bit better than today. Just incremental, just tiny bit, and just goes 2 steps up, 1 back. Okay, adjustments, boom, boom, boom. And then in a century, things are twice as good as they were. Okay, that's good. We should be happy with that.
I think ultimately that is kind of happening. It's slower than most people would like because there's an idea of what we would like society to be like, and it doesn't fit that yet. And so we're angry and frustrated, but I think it's a time management issue, too. The human being is only alive for 100 years. But during that 100 years, think about how much has changed. I remember when I was a kid, I guess I was 11 years old. We moved to Florida. And I moved from San Francisco to Florida. And San Francisco, we lived in a gay neighborhood, and our neighbors were gay. My aunt used to go over there and smoke pot and play bongo drums naked with this gay couple. It was very normal because it was during the Vietnam era, and it was just they were all hippies. And we went from there to Florida, which was very regressive in that way. And I had this friend. He was Cuban, and his dad was very homophobic. And his dad was really angry because he was reading this story. And I'll never forget it because I was 11. And he's like, "Oh, these gays want to get married." And he was really mad. He was throwing this newspaper down the table. And I remember thinking, why does he give a fuck if these gay people want to get married? What is that? How weird is that? Because there's always going to be some parts of our culture that are still regressive. But if you compare that then to today, so this was, I'm 55, so this is 44 years ago. So look back from 44 years ago to today, well, that's normal for, no one's going to say, if I went over to someone's house and they're like, "These gays want to get married," you're like, what do you give a fuck? Almost no one gives a fuck now.
Right, exactly.
It's you have to be like the hardest right-wing Christian fundamentalist to think that gay people shouldn't be allowed to get married now.
Think how fast that happened.
Pretty quickly.
2011, Hillary and Obama both said they were against same-sex marriage.
Yes.
Now,
they had to politically.
They had to politically. They probably
wanted
didn't
to
think
win.
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And now it's not even a discussion. And remember when interracial marriage was a thing? Well, me neither, because that was, when I was a young child. But 1967 was the Supreme Court Loving decision. It was illegal before that. Well, it was a states' rights thing. Many states had it illegal for interracial, for interracial couples to marry. Astonishing. That's the 60s. That's not that long ago.
Right.
And now pollsters don't even ask anymore. It's just like, well.
So it's relative to the fact that we have such a short lifespan. The progress is happening rapidly. If you look at history, like historically, it's rapid. But a human being doesn't live very long.
Right.
So we're frustrated. We want these changes. We want progress to appear like almost overnight.
Right. Yeah, I was reading a review of this book on witches and just one town in New England. And what life was like there, and it's this miserable life where everybody, people are dying and diseases, and Indians are going to get us, and the drought, and this winter storm, and pretty much life was nasty, brutish, and short.
Yeah.
Right? And there's like we have no explanation for this. It's the witches, right?
Do you know the story behind that? What they think the motivation for the witch trials were?
Which ones? The Salem?
Ergot poisoning.
Oh, ergot poisoning. Yes, I know about that.
That is why, because there's a lot of historical evidence that points to ergot poisoning and mass hallucinations and chaos.
Right.
There's one from, I believe it was 1950? There was one in France where they had a situation that was similar. There was ergot poisoning where a bunch of people died, in fact, because ergot is also toxic. Yeah, but in some quantities, it produces these LSD-like effects, and they coincide, the Salem witch trials, and this is controversial, but there seems to be some evidence that points to that coincides it with a late frost, and that this late frost produced this fungus on the wheat and the grains, and that these grains were likely infected with ergot. And I think they've found evidence of ergot.
I have read this. I think it's possible as an element. No human behavior is explained by one thing. Right.
It doesn't exist in a vacuum.
So you I could see like one, say, teenage girl does this and hallucinates and is chattering in voices or whatever. And then her other friends, they start mimicking it, sort of a social contagion. Like it's fun, and then it's like, oh, it's more than fun. And then the adults go like, oh, what's going on here? And then you have like a half a dozen elements going on there.
Right.
And in the case of the witch, in a way, the witch craze is a kind of conspiracy theory, right? Because one thing conspiracy theories do is they offer a causal explanation for chaos and randomness. Our brains are not well designed by evolution to understand randomness. My examples of this are like the stars in the sky are random, but they look like patterns, right? Or the Apple iPod Shuffle feature was introduced, in which your songs are fed to you randomly, and Apple got complaints. It's not random. Certain songs are coming up more than others. Like, that is random. So Apple, apparently, I'm told, had to reprogram it and program it so it feels random intuitively, but it's not. It's crazy, right? So much of life is just randomness, right? Shit happens. The bumper sticker, shit happens. And but that's uncomfortable. It's like, no, there must be something behind it. And if you don't have an explanation, no meteorology to explain weather, and no germs theory of disease to explain disease and so forth, what have you got? Witches.
Right. Well, if you talked about the satanic craze of the 80s, right? So imagine the satanic craze of the 80s, and then on top of that, ergot poisoning.
Right.
Well, oh my God, now you're drowning witches.
Right.
And that was the thing. They would drown a lot of witches, and they would say that if they drowned them, if they lived, clearly they were witches.
Right.
Well, no one fucking lived. So it was a lot of whoops. Well, I guess we killed a fucking innocent. They just kept killing people, thinking that they were witches.
Right. And there's a lot of research on this also, accusing people who are marginalized, poor people, women, and so on, who didn't have any power. And so the magistrates, people that had power and money that could have lawyers, whatever, they escaped.
Right. And also there was motivation to accuse people of horrific things, and you could use that to take their property. Do you know the story of Elizabeth Bathory?
No.
Elizabeth Bathory is a woman who lived, God, I want to say it was like the 1200s or something like that. And she was accused of doing these horrible things to other women. Like, she was accused of being like one of the greatest mass murderers and serial killers that's ever existed. And that she would take these beautiful young women and kill them and bathe in their blood and all this. And so we told this story, and then someone sent me a link to an article that said there's probably something more to that. And that really what it was they were accusing her of these things so that they could imprison her and take her land, and that it might have been that. And so they accused of her of these horrific atrocities, in order to take away her land.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's some of that kind of practical thing and revenge against people you don't like.
Sure. Yeah.
And then there's something called preemptive denunciation. You denounce people before you get denounced.
Right.
And that you denouncing somebody means you must not be a witch if you're denouncing them. And then you get this kind of competitive denunciation. No, you're a witch. No, you're a witch.
Right, right,
Much like the communist show trials, right? You got to
right.
denounce your neighbors as communists before they denounce you, or as non-communists, they denounce you, right? And
so that's the fear during mass hysteria, that people are going to turn on each other because they're afraid that someone's going to come after them, so they come after you first.
Right. I think we're going through that a little bit with cancel culture.
Sure, for sure, yeah.
I'm going to, get somebody on my campus and they used the wrong pronoun or the wrong adjective, and I'm going to denounce them before I get denounced and make the mistake.
Right. I will be the social justice warrior, so you couldn't possibly think that I've done anything wrong.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you get this thing called pluralistic ignorance, or the spiral of silence, where everybody thinks everybody else is thinking something when, in fact, nobody's actually thinking that. The classic experiment on this was binge drinking on college campuses. So you ask individual students by themselves, how do you feel about this? I don't really like it, but I know everybody else likes it. So everybody thinks that everybody else likes binge drinking, but actually individually they really don't like it. But I got to do it because everybody else is doing it, right? So this, in part, explains the kind of sustaining of the Nazi regime. Initially Hitler was popular because he stopped the Depression and got the economy going again and so on. And then he starts escalating, and everybody thinks, well, I'm not too happy about this policy, and the thing with the Jews, I don't know. But everybody else seems to be going along with it. And then by the time you get to the point where somebody needs to speak up and say, this is wrong, they have concentration camps for those people. And they did it in a way that you could see your neighbor being hauled out and think, I'm keeping my mouth shut. I'm not saying anything.
Right.
So this is what's called a common knowledge problem. If I know that you know that I know something, then together we can kind of both stand up and say, we're putting a stop to this, right? It's like the Leah Thomas thing with the swimming thing. None of the women competitive swimmers thought this was fair. Right? It's a guy competing against us, not right. But any one of them by themselves that speaks out, they may just get kicked off the team or they get punished by their peers or whatever. It would really take, how do we reverse this trend we're in? It would take all of them together saying, we're not going to compete, all of us, if that person comes in here.
Right.
And that's the only way it was. So that's a common knowledge problem. We all have to know that we know about this to put a stop to that. So
that's an interesting modern example of that, right? Because that is the case with when you see someone who's a biological male who competes against biological females and dominates them. When they were, as a biological male, not doing nearly as well, there's clearly something wrong here. And yet these women are called transphobes, and they're ostracized, and some of them are kicked off teams, and it's a horrible situation. It's very similar to that.
Have you seen this video that just came out of a male to female trans playing competitive volleyball, and he goes up for the spike and just boom, and it hits this girl in the face, and she's down and out, concussion, and it's like, okay, I support trans rights. I don't think people should be discriminated against for whoever they want to identify as or whatever. But there's conflicting rights. What about women's rights? Yeah. And my favorite quote from Thomas Sowell: "There are no perfect solutions. There's just compromises." Yes, trans rights, but women's rights. Women's bathrooms, but the guy wants to go. No, you can't. No, you just can't have everything, right?
Right. You can't have everything, because also you're going to have people that take advantage of the current cultural climate that might be sexual predators.
There are examples of that.
Yes.
It's not a hysteric thing that's happening everywhere, but it has happened.
Right. But then there are people that are legitimately trans, and they probably should be able to use the woman's restroom. So how do you, what is the compromise there?
Unisex bathrooms, I guess, have choices.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not that worried about the bathroom thing.
No, I'm not, but it's a weird one.
The sports thing bothers me, because I've been an athlete my whole life, and it's obvious why we have women's divisions in sports. It couldn't be more clear. We just celebrated Serena Williams' career. She'd had no career if there was no women's tennis division. Right. And it's like that for most sports. Although I'm always curious why there are women's divisions in chess. For example, I really don't know why that is the case.
You know, that's the case with pool as well. There's a trans woman who is become a world champion in certain billiards games. And people are confused about that. That's a weird one, in my opinion, because it's not a power-based game.
Right.
But there's something about testosterone and the understanding of 3D space that there's some sort of an advantage. It was very weird. Pool is a weird one. It's because it's a game that I'm obsessed with, and I've always wondered. There's only been like a few women who have been very competitive and been able to beat men consistently in competition. And a lot of them are lesbians. I don't know what that's all about. But there's...
well, they have more masculine physiology. That's why. So it's an on average, just think of two overlapping bell curves. Of course, there are some women that can beat some men.
Sure.
That's not what we're talking about.
But we're talking about the best of the best.
Right. Once you get up to the 6 standard deviations out, you're 0.01% top performer.
Right.
1% is a huge difference at that level.
Gigantic.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's curious. The chess thing is also very curious. That was what was fascinating about the Queen's Gambit film. The Netflix thing.
Right.
This woman is just dominating all these men. She has this superior chess mind. But in reality, that doesn't really exist very often.
Right.
And it's weird. Like, why not?
Yeah, yeah. Well, you've always made the point if an MMA fight, if there was a trans woman that killed a woman, that'd probably end it. Probably lawsuits would end it.
Yeah, well, I'm for people being able to do that if they want to do that. If it's a woman who's a biological woman who chooses to compete against a trans woman. And one of the examples that I've used is there's a woman named Germaine Durandamy who's a multiple-time world Muay Thai champion. She was a UFC champion. And she actually had a boxing match with a man and knocked him out, a biological man. But she's extraordinary. She is the 1% of 1% in terms of elite female combat sports athletes.
Right.
And so I'm in favor of her being able to make that decision to compete against a man. But to force a biological woman to compete against a trans woman in MMA, I think is criminal.
Yeah.
I think that is crazy. And to pretend they're the same thing is crazy. That doesn't make any sense to me.
If there was enough, you could have their own division.
Yes.
That would solve it.
That would solve it. And that's really that I think is the solution. That to me is the only compromise. And is there enough? I don't know. Maybe if you made a division like that. Look, for the longest time, they thought there weren't enough women to compete in combat sports to justify a UFC's women's division. But now the women's division of MMA is some of the most competitive and exciting.
Really?
Oh my God, yeah. There's a strawweight division, a flyweight division. There's a featherweight division, a bantamweight division. There's multiple divisions that are filled with elite female combat sports athletes, and some of those fights are fantastic. And, up until Ronda Rousey came into the UFC, which is not that long ago, was it 10 years ago? When they first started having women's MMA fights in the UFC, there was only one division. It was 135 pounds. That was it. And you didn't have all these other weight classes. Now, these other weight classes like flyweight in particular and strawweight, some of the most competitive. And they have incredible fights. So I think if you build it, they will come. And if there are that many trans female, trans women MMA competitors out there, maybe if they developed a division and they had that, maybe you would see a lot of competitors that would enter that, and it would become an exciting division.
Yeah.
But to make them compete against biological females, to make biological females compete against people who identify as female, I think is just insane.
Right. So I think we're thinking that fairness and justice trumps rights.
Yes.
Yeah, you should have the right, but it should also be fair.
Yes. What's interesting in many sports is women are allowed to compete against men. Biological females are allowed to enter into certain wrestling tournaments with biological males. They're allowed to. You can do that. But we never allow biological males to compete against biological females. We never allow someone who is both biologically male and identifies as male to compete against females in sports.
In the 1980s, I got into ultra-distance cycling, race across America. I did that 5 times. Then in the 90s, I was the race director. So we had, in 93, 94, 95, I had 2 women were competing, Shauna Hogan and Muffy Ritz, and they were phenomenal athletes, just really tough as could be. Now, this is coast to coast, nonstop. Every competitor has a motorhome behind them and so on, and it's just the clock never stops, and so it's a really ultra distance. And I remember I think it was 93 or 4, Shauna led the entire field all the way into Colorado. And me and my staff were thinking, maybe we don't need a men's division. Maybe we are the sport that can, it's all equal, right? And but by the end of the race, it was like a 1 day, like 26-hour difference between the top man and Shauna.
Wow.
And it's like, okay, I think we need, and I also talked to the women about it in off-season conversations. It's like, do you want a women's division? Yes.
Yeah.
Because there's still, even with ultra distance, people were making arguments at the time. Well, maybe women can endure pain better than men, and over the course of 3,000 miles rather than 100 miles, all those differences even out. But no, even there, and it just wasn't fair to make them compete against the men. So we had 2 divisions, and of course we have, like most sports, age divisions. So I think the first cut is at age 30, 40, 40 plus, 50 plus, 60 plus, and so on. For obvious reasons, biological decay of testosterone and strength, it just goes down in this. So to me, male to female trans post-puberty is doping. It's like taking testosterone or human growth hormone or EPO or whatever. Yeah. As you know, in cycling, it's a big issue because it makes a difference. I mean, I think Lance said it was like a 10% difference. Yeah. If you do the drug cocktail and you do it right and you have somebody professional that's coaching you on this, that's a huge difference at the top level. And it would be the same if you're post-puberty. So the NCAA had that rule. If you go 1 year of testosterone suppression post-puberty, then we're going to count you as a woman. But I don't see the evidence for that at all. Then the International Swimming Organization finally said, no, that's not enough. Because post-puberty, the changes have already happened.
Yes. It took till Leah Thomas started dominating that they made that decision, though.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Yeah.
Right. When somebody, finally, some of these women and the parents were speaking up, like, this is not fair. And like the boy who pointed to the emperor has no clothes, finally everybody goes, yeah, we all see it. He doesn't have clothes. Finally somebody said something, right? Yeah. Everybody could see this is not fair. Everybody knows it's not fair.
What is that about human beings, though, that they don't want to speak out and that we're willing to accept something that we know is not fair because culturally that's an accepted thing?
Well, part of it is fear of punishment.
Yeah.
You punish the outliers, the people who speak out. And that's part
of.
But
why are we punishing the outliers when that seems so obvious? That it's not fair?
That's an interesting question. So there might be some complex psychology there where I'm again this preemptive denunciation and also virtue signaling. Like if I stand out as being super virtuous, I'm going to get some points for that. Some of that I think is going on. Multiple factors. And, we're in the middle of it now. I think probably within 5 years. 5 years ago, no one was talking about, was it a Ricky Gervais bit about the use of the term, a woman without a penis or a woman with we would have never uttered this sentence 5 years ago.
Right.
Whatever it was. It was a really funny bit. And probably 5 years from now, we won't be talking about this either.
That's a good example because Ricky Gervais got a lot of death threats because of that. He had to really radically ramp up his security.
Right. Yeah. Well, okay. So he's non-cancelable. Right. But what about all the comedians down here that are cancelable? They're going to probably keep their mouth shut.
Yeah.
But I don't know that.
The thing is there's a reward for speaking out and saying the things that everybody thinks but they're afraid to say. Mm-hmm. Particularly with audiences. Like when you're anonymous in a crowd and you're having a couple of cocktails and it's dark and someone says it like, yes, finally. You see it in comedy clubs that people are taking chances because they're recognizing that it's rewarded to speak out and say these things.
Another thing I think back to the kind of moral progress that we might be experiencing now is we've made so much moral progress. Today's young activists that want to do something to make the world a better place, slavery, torture, civil rights, women's rights, gay rights, done.
Yeah.
What's next? Oh, trans rights. Okay, I'm going to get out there. Okay, good. That's good.
But as you said, the problem is that it gets in the way of women's rights.
Right.
especially when it comes to athletic competition.
Right. So conflicting rights. Well, you can't have everything, right? So anyway, I think that's part of it. Like, I want to do something, right? Or like, just thinking about the George Floyd protests and the BLM movement. What can I do about police violence against African Americans? I'm nobody. I'm not the chief of police. I'm not the mayor. I'm just a citizen. Well, there's a march tomorrow, and we're going to go down there and we're going to voice our disapproval of the way African Americans are treated. Yes,
right.
I'm going to go down there and do it. So I feel like I'm doing something.
Yeah.
Right. A little bit like commenting on Twitter. I'm outraged by this. Like, I feel like I did a little something.
Right.
Even though it probably doesn't do anything.
How do you think this stuff all plays out? Do you think eventually it's one of those things, like as we were talking about before, the ebb and flow of things, that there's an overcorrection and then things kind of balance itself out?
I think you said it right. That's right. It's a pendulum, right?
Yeah.
And I think the pendulum going in this direction, well, that's good. Whoa, whoa, whoa.
We went a little crazy. Yeah.
Reel that thing in a little bit.
And then overall, through time, we will get moral progress because of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there are trans. There are, there's intersex people. There are people who identify as the other sex and so on. That's real. Is it really the numbers that we're now seeing? 2,000% spike in the last 2 years, and in these massive increases in the UK, and probably some of that is social contagion. You know, it's sort of, this is the thing to do. Some of it may be real.
Well, we know social contagion is real.
Yeah.
We know that's real. That's a real phenomenon.
Right.
So to say that can't be it seems a little disingenuous.
Right.
And seems like a lot of virtue signaling.
Right. Right. So their counter to that is, society's more acceptable now, accepting of people that are different. So that's why these people are coming out. But the counter to that is, but it's only in a certain cohort, age 13 to 17 or so, where the huge spike is.
It's a lot of biological females too.
Yeah, and it's weird. Way more.
Yeah, and that's Abigail Schreier's work,
right?
The irreversible damage.
I had a student maybe 2 years ago that came out as trans. She decided she wanted to be a man. And it's like, okay, and everybody was super curious about this. It's a small discussion seminar type class that I teach, and as the course of the weeks went by, it would come up almost every week. It came up a lot. And I thought, I wonder if she really wants to be a man, or she wants to be trans, because this was a cool thing to be. And she got love bombed, and everybody's asking her questions. What are you going to do about this? How are you going to dress? What about that? And you could see it was. But if it was just like, I'm just going to be a man, and I'm not going to tell anybody, I'm just going to change the way I'm living my life, I think that would not be as interesting or rewarding. There would be no social reinforcement for that. So I think, in part, again, multiple things. Some of it's real, some of it's social contagion. I think some of it is this kind of a trendy thing to be. It's Andrew Sullivan writes about this. It's not cool to be gay anymore. Where'd the lesbians go? Right? There's no more lesbians. They're all gone. And he makes the point, and since he's a gay guy, he could do this, that when he was a teenager boy, 13, 14, 15, he finds himself attracted to other guys and not women. And what if he was told at that time, you're not gay, you're actually a woman. You're just in the wrong body. And then that's kind of, in a way, he says it's kind of homophobic.
Yes. Yeah, my friend Tim says that. He's gay. He has that argument about it, that a lot of it is homophobic.
Whether it's really homophobic, in their hearts, I don't know. But it has that taint to it.
Yes. That's also the argument that it's anti-women.
Right.
That's you're changing what it means to be a woman.
Right.
And that's the film. What is a woman? When you watch that film and you see the argument, when Matt Walsh has these deadpan questions to these people and he lets them just speak their thoughts about it. It's like, whoa! Who thought this was where we're at right now? Very strange.
Right. Well, there's a lot of confusion there between gender and sex. What do you mean? How do you define this stuff? I wrote about this, fuzzy sets. It's kind of a family resemblance. What is a game? What is a chair? Well, chair is, it's got legs, 4 legs. Well, this one has 5. It's got a back. What about a bar stool? It doesn't have a back. What about a beanbag chair? That doesn't have legs or a back, And so, but I know when I see one, right? So, so we know what a man is. We know what a woman is. For the most part, we can identify them. But there's going to be a little fuzzy around the fuzzy edges. Where, it's like, okay, right. But is it really a whole nother category, right? So from an evolutionary biology perspective, if we really had more than 2 sexes, there would be like a billion of the third sex.
Yeah.
If that was a real thing, rather than as an anomaly.
Well, that's one of the weirder things about homosexuality in general, is that there's not really like an evolutionary, like if you thought about like the reproduction of whatever it means to be homosexual, well, it sort of like eliminates that. Like, how is it that homosexuality has always maintained a certain percentage of our society? It's really interesting, just from an objective perspective of looking at what it is, like in terms of natural selection. Like, there was a comedian that had a joke about that. Otto and George. Otto and George was a puppet act from New York, hilarious comedian. And the puppet would say crazy shit, and he would go, "What are you saying?" Like, that's outrageous. How could you say that? And his thing was like about the gays. He goes, from a bunch of people that can't reproduce. Where the fuck are they all coming from?
Yeah.
It was very funny.
It is funny because it has kind of an element of a true question.
Right.
Why is there homosexuality in a sexually reproducing species like ours?
Yeah.
So evolutionary theorists have debates about this. Maybe they're kind of surrogate parents or pseudo-parents or faux parents to their siblings' offspring, their uncles and aunts, and that, gets their genes for homosexuality in the next generation or something, because they're not reproducing directly. Okay, maybe, but it's not clear if it's that, or if maybe there's no adaptive purpose to it at all. It's just a byproduct. It's just things happen. There's just kind of randomness.
Yeah,
in
it seems
sexual
like
preferences.
that, because I've heard. Well, there's a spectrum of like masculine females and feminine men. The problem with that that theory is there's a lot of very masculine gay men.
Right.
So that's like, well, what is that?
Right.
that like is a giant monkey wrench into your equation. Like,
right.
That doesn't make any sense.
Right.
Like, it seems to be just an aspect of human beings.
Right.
But again, going to like moral progress, it is a clear sign of moral progress. The difference between when I was 11, my friend's dad, who was so angry that people were gay and they were getting married, versus today, where it's like very accepted for the most part.
Right.
It's a tiny percentage of people, I'm sure, still have a problem with it, like really extreme religious fundamentalists.
Right.
But for the most part, society has kind of accepted that.
Well, because religion endorsed a marriage initially, and then the state got involved, its original purpose was reproduction.
Yes.
And so that was why there was resistance by the church all the way up until really 2010s against it, because you're not making babies. Well, what about older couples or couples that are infertile? That are heterosexual but infertile, and there's always exceptions to this, but that's kind of how it started. The purpose of marriage initially was to increase the population of either your religion or your government, right? I mean, even today, if you're married, as you know, you get a tax break. I assume you do here in Texas too, but the federal government gives you a tax break. If you're married, if you have kids, you get another tax break. In a way, the government say, we want you to be married, and we want you to have kids, and we want you to be a homeowner, by the way. We'll let you deduct your interest on your mortgage. And so the government does these sort of things, as religion did. The whole primogeniture and the inheritance of the wealth to the first son and so on. All these rules were based on how can we grow our numbers and compete with the other religions. So fecundity is a proxy for religious success. You just have a lot of babies. There's only two ways to grow a religion. You have babies or you have converts, and it's hard to convert people.
That was one of the things that people were really worried about with the reversal of Roe v. Wade, is that gay marriage was going to be next on the chopping block. And there was discussions about that, which is, that's a clear anti-progressive position.
It is. I'm worried about that. I'm hoping that this is just a couple of far-out GOP candidates that are trying to appeal to their base by saying, we're going to take away gay marriage, and by the way, we're going to get rid of contraception too. We want women to just be in the bedroom making babies.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that the GOP in mass says, no, that's not what we're about.
But it is wild that in 2022 that's still up for discussion.
Unbelievable.
That people are literally talking about getting rid of contraception.
Yeah, I know.
Getting rid of gay marriage, getting rid of contraception, like, hey. But isn't that the pendulum, though? Like what we were talking about.
Yeah.
Like with moral progress, there's going to be an overcorrection.
Right.
And that some people, the outliers of the religious fundamentalists who don't want any progress, they basically want things to go back to like a religious fundamentalist version of what a Christian society should be. And there's some people that are out there, and it's not a small number. That's what's spooky.
Christian nationalism is a thing. It's getting big. It's getting bigger. Michael Flynn, the general. There's a new documentary out of CNN film about him, in which he's got huge crowds, in which he's basically saying we need to return America, make America great again, but make America Christian again is what he's.
Well, he's one of those QAnon guys too.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Which is, if you've watched the documentary Into the Storm, have you seen the HBO?
Of course, yeah.
It's amazing.
Yes.
That's so good. And I had the gentleman on who created that, and it just, what a fucking wild thing it is to see the actual people that created it, and to see what a scam they pulled off, and how weird it is that people just hopped on board and they really did think that there was some people working behind the scenes that were working for God and country, and they were going to expose all these pedophiles and Satanists and
the deep state.
Oh my God, it's amazing.
Do you think when I talk about this in the book, do you think when people say, I think they tell a poster, I think there could be something to QAnon or Pizzagate or whatever, did they really believe it? I mean, the one guy did, Edgar Welch. He went to that Comet Ping Pong Pizzeria with his AR-15 and shot up the place. But most people don't do that. If you really thought there was a pedophile ring, a crime going on, and the police wouldn't do anything about it, wouldn't you go there? Wouldn't you want to do something? So I'm wondering, did these people really believe it, or are they just kind of like, well, I don't know. It seems like the kind of thing those Democrats would do, and I don't like them. Or
there's a little bit of that.
Tribalism.
I think there's also a little bit of, like what we were talking about earlier about conspiracy theories. They're exciting. And for you to have secret information that's not available to everybody else, that could expose. That's a big thing always. We're going to expose these people. We're going to expose the evil, expose the Satanists, and expose the pedophiles. And there's a lot of people that don't have real excitement in their actual life. And through online activities and message boards and social media groups and the like, they find purpose. And one of the purposes is like to take down the evil empire, to take down the deep state. There's a real inclination towards that.
It's like the hero's journey, right? The Joseph Campbell, you go out and conquer the beast and come back, and it kind of makes your life meaningful. I worked on this Netflix documentary on brainwashing, and the producers found this woman in Texas who went down the rabbit hole, the QAnon rabbit hole. And so she was very successful, intelligent, educated, good-looking, married with kids, the whole thing. And then so she talks about this, during COVID, at the shutdown, my business sort of collapsed. I was bored out of my skull. I'm online all day. And the next thing you know, like 6 months later, her husband's giving her an ultimatum. It's QAnon or me. And she had the phone. She goes, here's the message he left me.
Wow.
And she said, initially, this is the most important thing I'll ever do. I am going to expose this crime. I'm changing the world. I am a warrior.
Yeah.
I'm out of here. And then a couple months later, I guess she woke up and went, what the fuck did I do? My husband's leaving me. I'm losing my kids and house. What?
How did she get so wrapped up in it? Did she ever talk about it afterwards?
Yeah, just again, the daily kind of feed online, which you can find websites on anything. And
but that one in particular was like particularly engrossing for some people. It became their whole life, and that was documented in that Into the Storm.
Right.
With those poor people, and some of them that were Obama supporters.
Right.
That just flipped over to, now I realize they're the bad ones, and we're the good ones, and we're patriots, and it's crazy.
Well, yeah, and there's entertainment value. These things are really interesting and fun to read about, and it's.
Well, that goes along with all the other conspiracy theories. Like I went into unfortunately last night, I went down a rabbit hole of Bigfoot.
You did?
Yes. I went down the Bigfoot rabbit hole last night.
Boy, that's an old one.
It's an old one. There was a video that showed up in my YouTube feed, and I clicked on it. And then you know how YouTube on the right-hand side, it gives you, maybe you want to watch this.
Oh, yes, of course.
And I forget what the initial video was, but I went 3 or 4 videos down the hole, and I got to a professor out of Oregon that I've actually Meldrum.
Yes, I know that guy.
Yeah, I've actually had him on the podcast before when I was doing that Joe Rogan Questions Everything thing. He was a guy that said that he would cut off one of his fingers if he could find out that Bigfoot was
the real one.
I'm like, oh my God, dude. So I went went down and I watched him being interviewed, and then oh, now I remember what it was. When I was in England, I was watching a show on television that was like one of those discovery shows about monsters. And it was like just a clearly bullshit show where they're like, you know, we're going to go find them. We're going to use night vision and we're going to go to the woods. And these people all believe it. And so I'm like, how many episodes are there of this fucking thing? And then I start.
Yeah, exactly.
There's so many. But this professor who I think he's a professor of anthropology.
Yeah, yeah.
He's like a legitimate professor.
Yeah, yeah.
I think it's University of Oregon.
Yeah. Well, this is, again, my argument why the rational believe the irrational. These are not uneducated, stupid people wearing tinfoil hat. You know, no, they're not. They're smart people. But smart people and educated people are better at rationalizing beliefs they hold for non-smart reasons.
Yeah.
Right? So, do you know Reinhold Messner, the great alpinist that summited Everest, I think 7 times without oxygen, considered the greatest climber of all time, and German alpinist? He wrote a book about Bigfoot, a Yeti, you know, because he's heard all about Yeti in the Himalayas, and he had told all the Sherpas, okay, look, if you see this thing, you know, just wake me up out of the tent. Right? So one day they're like, boss, it's there, Yeti. He's like, oh my God. So they hiking around the corner, and there's this big bear. And he's like, that's Yeti? Yeah, that's Yeti. It's like, oh, okay.
Yeah, that's certainly a lot of it. A lot of it is, and bears do walk upright all the time. Yeah, especially if they get an injured front paw, they're capable of walking upright. I've seen in the wild. I've seen bears walk upright.
Oh my God!
Yeah,
wow.
Black bears from very close, from 20 feet or 20 yards away. I've seen them walk multiple steps on their back feet. Now, if you were looking at that through the forest, like a deep forest, like it's, I don't think it's a coincidence that the Pacific Northwest is where they cite a lot of them, because there's a rainforest out there that are so dense. It's like, the way I describe it's like a box of Q-tips. Like seeing through all the Q-tips, you can't possibly see. So if you saw a bear walking on 2 legs through like a couple of trees, and then your mind starts going, oh my God, did I just see a gorilla or some sort of an ape creature? Oh, it's Bigfoot. And then you have it in your head that you saw a Bigfoot because you saw a bear. You know, a bear, a big black bear, is a 7-foot animal. Right. It's a big creature. Yeah. They're walking upright like that. You would assume that that is a giant Sasquatch that you just saw. Yeah. And then your mind starts working on, your memory sucks anyway, especially with chaotic, you know, extremely novel events like that. And so then you get it in your head that you saw a Sasquatch.
Well, this is how illusions work. You know, those auditory illusions where they put the words on the top of the screen and they play the voice. You can't quite make out what it is, but when you see the words that and it flips back and forth. So this works because when you can't quite tell what it is, then a cue, a prime, it's called priming, will direct your brain to hear one thing or the other thing, or see things. This is how these visual illusions work, right? So it's always degraded information, right? The shadow, I can't quite see. If you squint and use your imagination, I can sort of see the 2 legs and maybe an arm. And, you know, but for biologists, it's pretty simple. Just show me the body and I'll accept it.
Yeah, you know who doesn't believe in Bigfoot? The people that are in the woods all the time.
Oh, right.
All of my friends that are hunters, like the most extreme hardcore guys who backpack and go deep into the mountains for like, you know, weeks at a time, like none of them. 0 sightings.
Really? Right.
The people that are the sightings are the casuals. The people that don't spend any time in the woods.
Well, you know, cryptozoologists say, well, we didn't know about the mountain gorilla until 1903.
But we know.
But we would know by now.
Yeah, that's
people
not a
have
good
looked.
example because there's a fucking really clear video of the mountain gorilla.
Right.
You know, the thing about the Bigfoot thing that is, you know, there's always an element of something in there. The thing about Bigfoot that's fascinating is the Gigantopithecus, is that it did coincide with the human beings of 100,000 years ago. So we know for sure then. So you would imagine that maybe 50,000 years ago there were some of them still, and maybe it's legend and folklore. There's many things that are passed on through myth and discussions and stories, and that's probably what it was. And that at one point in time there was a gigantic bipedal hominid that was 8 to 10 feet tall. We know they're real. We know that's but it's just an animal that existed, just like an orangutan, just like a gorilla. Chimpanzee, there was a hominid, a large sort of primate creature that was really enormous but died out.
Given our propensity to stereotype things, imagine if Neanderthals had not gone extinct and they were still around, right? And they were somehow different from us or whatever. Would we enslave them? Would we kill them off? Would we treat them equally?
Did to them. That's probably what the humans, the Homo sapiens, did to them, right?
There's different theories about that. Maybe. Well, so 2% of our genome is Neanderthal. So
yeah.
I call this the Stephen Stills explanation. You know, Stephen Stills, if you can't be with the one you love the one you're with. Right. Well, I'm alone in the cave tonight, and there's no Homo sapiens around. But hey, here's a Neanderthal.
Yeah, it makes you wonder. Like, was it Homo sapien females that bred with the Neanderthal males, or was it Neanderthal females that Homo sapien male? Like, I wonder what was the predominant.
Well, given human sexual psychology and the differences between men and women and how indiscriminate men are compared to women, women are much more risk averse.
Yeah.
About that, they have fewer partners. They want fewer partners. Probably male to female. I'm guessing.
Yeah. Makes sense. But also, then, you know, who knows? I mean, we're talking about an incredibly aggressive time. You know, how much of that was rape?
Yes.
You know, like a lot of animal breeding is basically rape.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of the way, like, you ever see koala bears mate?
Yeah.
The cute little fellows?
No, I haven't seen it.
It's disturbing.
It's pretty
they're
violent.
pretty ruthless and violent. And cats, you know, when you see cats mate, it's horrific. You wonder, like, I mean, it's also the human species is so fascinating too, because they're always finding like Denisovans. There's always finding these new branches of humans. Like, how many of them were there? And then there's the Hobbit people.
Yeah, the Hobbits, right? Probably at least a dozen bipedal primates.
Probably
at the same time.
The island of Flores Hobbit people. That is fascinating, because I think they boiled that one down to, what was it, like 15, 20,000 years ago?
Right, not that long ago.
Crazy.
After Neanderthals went
extinct. Yes, there was these little 3 foot tall, and they don't really know what they looked like other than, you know, guesswork, but they think they were hairy.
Right.
There's a hairy little 3 foot tall bipedal people-like things that were a separate branch of the evolutionary, you know, chain of primates.
I remember when that story broke. It's a pretty dense forested island. It was like, maybe they're still there.
Yes.
They're holed up in some cave.
Well, there's a belief that there's a thing called an orang pendek. You ever heard of that one? Orang pendek is very similar in stature and description. And I think they believe they're in Vietnam. I think it's maybe Cambodia or Vietnam. See if we can find that. But that is one of those mythological creatures that until they found the Flores people, I think they found them in, I want to say it's the 2000s. The late 90s or the 2000s that they discovered those. And then they started saying, well, hey, maybe there was something to that orang pendek thing too, because it's a similar part of the world and a similar shape creature. But they were talking about, there it is. Have we found evidence of the elusive orang pendek? Interesting. Describes last month an expedition in the jungles of Sumatra.
Interesting.
On the trail of the... So, even the age of satellite mapping, global positioning, there remains lost worlds where few humans tread, where species of animals unrecognized by science live. I'll say this name. Kerinci Seblat National Park in West Sumatra is one such place. The size of a small country, its dim, steamy interior has never been explored properly, and last month I returned to these jungles for the 4th time to track an elusive and yet unrecorded species of ape known to the locals as the orang pendek or short man. This year's expedition was the largest of its kind to ever visit the area. It consisted of 2 teams. The first made up of Adam Davies, expedition leader for the Center for Fortean Zoology, Dave Archer, Andrew Sanderson, and myself, would concentrate on the highland jungles around Lake Gunung, Tuja. I'm just guessing there. The second team consisted of Dr. Okay, what does it say? Before team left, one guide, Sahar, introduced us to an eyewitness called Pak Antis, who claimed to have seen an orang pendek in the garden area in April. He described it as around 3 feet tall, but with massive shoulders and chest. He pointed to a piece of washing on the line to indicate the color of its hair. A mid-tan, it had an ape-like face, walked upright on 2 legs while swinging its arms. Huh.
Well,
Who knows?
You need Well, you need a breeding population for, if they last centuries or thousands of years. You can't just have one or two.
Right, but if this thing is living in an unexplored area the size of a small country.
Right, yeah, that's enough.
Yeah, that would be amazing.
Yeah.
Could you imagine? I mean, now that we know that it exists, we have plenty of fossil evidence and bone evidence and DNA that points to that. Homo floresiensis.
Right. Given how many of these species went extinct, we're the only ones still around. Imagine if we had gone extinct and Neanderthals survived. Would they be making spaceships and internet and computers?
Right.
So it's a question of progress, evolutionary and cultural progress. Is there a certain inevitability to it, which brings us back to the SETI question? You could have a planet in which life gets all the way up to the level of Neanderthal complexity with big brains and hands and art and so on, and maybe you never detect them because they never get to a stage where they make radio technology and spaceships and things like that. Is that possible? See, I'm just kind of asking rhetorically.
Seems like it could be.
I don't know. Yeah.
I mean, we probably would have never gotten to where we were if it wasn't for the asteroid impact that killed the dinosaurs.
Right. Yes, right. So much of it is kind of chance.
Yeah.
And, Neanderthal looks like they had language based on the skull size back here and some other things here and their genome. It looks like they had the genes for language, maybe something like, not ours totally conceptually, but maybe something like that. Were they held back by us? Because they had Europe to themselves for about 300,000 years. But their toolkits don't get progressively more complex, and their art doesn't get more complex like ours does. When we got to Europe and they went extinct, and then you see that kind of progress. So it's an open question that no one knows the answer to, but it touches on the SETI thing because is there kind of a directionality to evolution where you end up with communicating technologically sophisticated civilizations, or is it pretty random and you could get pretty far and then we never know that they were there?
Well, I think if you think about the absolutely enormous numbers of possibilities, you probably have all of them. Yeah. You probably have, places where dinosaurs just rule and that's it. And, and shrews stayed shrews.
Right. The impact never happened on that planet, right?
Or you get to something where you have a completely different sort of an environment and things progress far more rapidly. And you also don't have the concern with asteroidal impacts or natural disasters. It's a much more stable environment on these planets. I mean, you would think of the variability would be endless. Just the sheer numbers of planets you're dealing with. Mm-hmm. The question is, once we find life somewhere else, then it all becomes open-ended, right? Once we find absolute evidence that there's a life form on this other spinning body that's circling around a star, we got one. Okay, now we have some moving creatures that exist on this planet. Holy cow, now we know for sure.
I had an interesting discussion with Richard Dawkins one time about to what extent that aliens would look anything like us, like the alien abduction stories. It's always this bipedal primate with the big eyes, and the bulbous head and no ears and so forth. But what are the chances they'd look anything like us? Evolved on some other planet, right? They could be like octopuses or something.
Yeah.
But Richard points out it may not be as random as I'm describing, because Simon Conway Morris, who studies convergent evolution, shows that based on physics of water, air, and land, to move around on the land, you got to have something like legs. To move through the water, you have to have kind of a smooth, fusiform body to slide through such a dense medium. If you're in the air, you got to have something like wings, right? And so you're going to have probably creatures with most of the sensory apparatus and brains on one end, waste disposal system on the other end, some arms and legs to move around on the land. You could get something like a bipedal primate. It may not be a mammal or whatever. It could be a dinosaur that was bipedal. And if you have a big enough brain, they could make tools and so on. So it could be something like that.
Could be, but then you also have the intelligent life that we know exists on Earth that doesn't have the ability to manipulate its environment, like orcas and dolphins, which is fascinating because orca and dolphin have enormous brains. They have complex languages that we can't decipher. They have very sophisticated social systems.
Right.
But they don't possess the ability to manipulate their environment like we do. They never needed it. They can move through 3D space.
Right.
They're inside the water. They're the apex predators, particularly orcas. They have no threat.
Right.
That is really fascinating. Like,
again, you could have a planet with that, and we never know they're there,
right?
Unless we go there and see them.
Is there any evidence that there were any dinosaurs that had any sort of advanced, larger brains?
No, not that I know of. Although people like Jack Horner, the paleontologist, he thinks they're much more social and communicating in a social way than we've given them credit for. They weren't dumb. Not big brains like you're thinking of, like the
like
cetaceans.
An orca.
Cetaceans have big brains to
Right.
their body size. There you would expect more intelligence. But yeah, well, I don't know. Probably not. You know, they never had tools, for example.
So
but they don't really need them.
But it seems like super intelligent life forms, they're either like us or they're like a dolphin and an orca on this planet. Like or crows.
Yes, crows, right. Sagan was always careful about this, anthropomorphizing what the aliens would be like. You know, just kind of the chauvinism of it. They're going to be like us. Well, how many species on Earth are like us?
Right.
None.
Right.
You know, we can't even talk to an octopus or a dolphin. We don't know what they're saying.
Right.
And if we can't talk to them, and they grew up, they're mammals.
Right.
And they're on the same planet as us. How are we going to communicate with aliens? This was an interesting group that Sagan was part of. This dolphin, it was with the Society of the Dolphin Society or something. John C. Lilly was this.
Oh yeah, sure.
I forget the name of it, but because he started giving dolphins LSD and stuff.
Yeah, well, he also had that experiment where he had the woman living in the home with a dolphin, and she had to masturbate the dolphin to get it to pay attention, and so they killed the study once that came out,
right?
Which is unfortunate. It's like, but he was also like, he invented the sensory deprivation tank.
Right.
You know, he was a really out there guy, and he was into ketamine for whatever weird reason. He would take intramuscular ketamine and then get in the sensory deprivation tank.
I've heard you talk about this. I just wanted to ask you directly. You know, when somebody takes LSD or one of the others, and they feel like it's a door opening, doors of perception, into some other reality. Is there really a reality, or is it just brain chemistry?
It's a good question. I think you're thinking of dimethyltryptamine.
Yes.
The reason why dimethyltryptamine is so interesting is because it's endogenous. The human brain produces it. It's trackable. You can find it. And now through the Cottonwood Research Foundation, they've found that the brain, they used to think it was the pineal gland, but I had Dr. Rick Strassman on, who conducted the first FDA-approved studies on psychedelics through dimethyltryptamine, where they were IV dosing these people with it. And I actually had a conversation with Graham Hancock when I was in London this weekend, and he said that they're doing some at the University of London now too that are very fascinating. Where they're doing the same sort of thing, where they're using IV drips so they can prolong the DMT state for very long periods of time and then come back with these very similar descriptions of what's going on. Who fucking knows? Who knows what is happening? If that is a doorway that opens up in the mind that leads you to another dimension, or whether it's the human consciousness, the imagination, and the visual cortex interacting with these incredibly powerful psychoactive compounds that give a similar visual hallucination to everyone. You know, I don't think there's a way to know right now.
Right. So this is kind of an epistemological problem. You know, what should I believe is true? I don't know about that, because what if? So Richard Dawkins and I have this kind of standing invitation to go to this ayahuasca place in Costa Rica, and Richard had a stroke. He said, "I don't think I better do this," and I think I probably won't do it. But I'm curious to know, what if I did it? And I came back. I said, "Oh my God, Joe, I've been a skeptic and a materialist, and I've discovered that there's this other reality." And you go, "Well, how do you know it's true?" I said, "Because I experienced it." And then you go, "Well, how can I know it's true? Here, you try it." And then you go, "Yeah, I did it. You're right." But how does Jamie know? Well, he has to try it. How do we get out of the loop that it may just be brain chemistry and nothing more than that, or you're actually going somewhere? If we hit an epistemological wall, we can't know.
I don't know what the answer to that is, but I do think that it would benefit you to try it, just so that you could experience something that's so profoundly unique that it throws into question what reality is overall. because we think of reality as only being things that we can measure, things that we can touch, things that we can put on a scale. And you, as the editor of Skeptic Magazine in particular, you're very skeptical about things. But what you experience with the most potent of hallucinogens, whether it's mushrooms, whether it's psilocybin, or whether it's dimethyltryptamine, or any of these really, really potent ones, you experience something that seems so much more vivid than reality itself. It's very confusing. It's like, what is happening here? Am I actually interacting with entities, or are there thoughts that I have in my mind that are so potent and profound, like things like creativity and love and emotions, that if you attach them to this psychedelic compound, they dance for you in a way that seems like they're an actual entity? Who knows? But I would like you to do it. I'd like you to do it just because I respect your opinion, and I'd like to see what your thought is when you come back from it.
I would imagine I would have a profound experience, because most people do, right? But
I don't think I've talked to anybody who hasn't had a profound experience, or at least an interesting one.
And I read Oliver Sacks's memoir, his autobiography, where he did this stuff. And he decided it was just all brain chemistry. But it was super profound. Like, he's in a restaurant and the people all have these fly-like heads. The waiters.
Which one did he do?
I think he did LSD, or maybe actually I can't remember now. But he writes about the brain. He's a neurologist and so on. And it's like, okay, so what does this mean? What is he saying? And how would it be different when I read about people who have near-death experiences. Then I read Oliver Sacks's experience, or you talk about in the opening of one of Sam Harris's books. He talks about taking what did he take?
I think it was LSD.
It might have been LSD. Right? Just a super profound sense of love for his friend there, and all these really super rich experiences. But he's pretty much hardcore materialist on this. So I'm curious to try to see where I'd fall. I'd be like, oh yeah, no, this is just an interesting experience. It's just brain chemistry. Or would I be like maybe Graham? Like, oh, there's this whole other world out there that I didn't know about. And here's what I'm worried about, Joe. I don't like, if we were having this conversation 500 years ago and somebody's telling us about dark energy and dark matter and quantum physics, and we'd be going, this is bullshit.
Right.
And then I don't want to miss, like, oh my God, there is this other.
I don't think there's a danger in you doing it. So I think you should do it.
Okay.
Because I don't think, it's the thing about dimethyltryptamine in particular, which is what ayahuasca, that's the psychoactive compound, is that it's endogenous to the human body, and it's one of the most transient drugs ever observed. It's really, your body brings you back to baseline very quickly, especially with the smoked version of DMT. The oral one is different, the ayahuasca, because you're orally, it's broken down in the gut by monoamine oxidase. And so what ayahuasca is a combinatory medication where you're taking DMT from one plant and MOA inhibitors from another plant, and that's what allows you to take it orally. So it's a longer acting but less profound version in terms of like the flash of DMT is so much more vibrant apparently. But it's not. It doesn't seem to be dangerous. It seems like everybody who takes it comes back. And
you've done this.
Yes, I've only done DMT, which is the more potent version of it. The ayahuasca version I haven't done yet, but I'm doing it soon. And that is supposed to be the long term. And the thing about the benefit of the long one seems to be that the more you can interact with that state, the more you come back with life lessons. So we'll see.
Well, there was something about the ayahuasca where you revisit dark memories and bad things in your life, and I'm not sure I want to go through that again. I don't know if that's inevitable.
Some people haven't. My friend Tom just did it, and he said it was all good. There was no bad thoughts and bad memories at all. It was all beautiful. And I think you can kind of prime your mind and prepare yourself with meditation and sort of, put yourself in a good state of mind when you enter into that experience.
Right. So you do this with somebody, a guide or somebody that
generally. Yeah.
So here this, again, back, what is truth? So if you channel your inner Jordan Peterson, you say, well, it doesn't matter if it affects the person's life, then it's true. Whatever that means, that word, right? See, I'm kind of locked into the kind of empiricist scientific view of truth. It's out there. It's an actual physical reality of some kind, it's measurable and so on. Right. But what if it's not that? What if truth is just, well, it matters for me. Like, I believe I have free will. Maybe you're a determinist, but I don't care. I feel like I'm making free choices. Matters to me.
Right.
It's my truth. I don't mean this in that kind of
I know what you're saying.
Postmodern way, but just maybe it is a postmodern way.
Yeah, the way I've described it is imagine if you could have a conversation with God, absolutely real conversation with God, where you could go to a place and have a conversation with this loving, knowing entity that knows all and sees through you and explains to you that we're all connected in this unseen cosmic way, and if you just address that in your life and treat people that way, you will live a better life. And you have this brief meeting with God, and it's very profound. And then you come back and you have to sort of come to grips with what you've experienced. Well, that you wouldn't be able to measure either. That feeling, that the experience, how would you be able to prove to people that you had a conversation with God? You would just have to like learn from that experience yourself, and somehow or another try not to slip back into the human folly and all the bad behavior and thought patterns that we've all existed with. Well, psychedelics in the most profound breakthrough way are like that. They are like having a conversation with God. And whether or not it's a hallucination or whether or not it's actually meeting and interacting with all-knowing entities, the experience is the same.
Right.
So whether it's real or whether it's an imagination or a hallucination, the profundity, the profound nature of the experience is the same.
Right.
So I don't know if it's real or not real.
Maybe that's not even the right question.
Right. I mean, we do have a problem with wanting things to be measurable,
right?
Because that's how we've gotten this far,
right?
We've gotten this far. Like,
it works.
If you take 20 Tylenols, you'll be dead. But
right.
if you take one, it'll fix your headache, right?
Yeah.
So we're big on measuring things, which is important. You know, I mean, you know how much this is a heavy table. You don't want to put it on your back,
right?
You know, like we have all these.
It's measurably
heavy. Yes, but these things are not measurable, and that's one of the more interesting things about them. That these psychedelic experiences are not measurable, and they're very personal and they're very profound. And I don't think it would hurt you at all. I think it would help you.
All right, I'll do it.
All right, we're in.
Where is it?
Right here. We're going to shut the camera off right now.
What if that is God? What if somebody had one of these trips way back 5,000, 10,000 years ago and said, I talked to God, and they did in their head. And other people went, you know, like that Ricky Gervais movie, The Invention of Lying, where he comes out and they think he talked to God and he knows. And it's like, oh, because you can't lie, right?
Well,
so
you know,
maybe it's like that. And
that's what these scholars out of the University of Jerusalem felt was the source of the burning bush in Moses.
Right.
They think it's the acacia tree.
Right.
And that the acacia tree is rich in DMT.
Right.
And they think that's
what if that triggered the whole thing?
Well, you know, that is also John Marco Allegro's thoughts.
Oh, right.
The sacred mushroom and the cross.
That's right. I forgot about that.
Yeah.
Right.
And he was a scholar who was assigned to be one of the people deciphering the Dead Sea Scrolls. And after 14 years of working on it, it was his belief that the Christian religion was really initially about consumption of psychedelic mushrooms and fertility rituals. But, you know, good luck trying to decipher that and find out if he's right.
Yeah. Yeah, so when someone like myself or Richard Dawkins says, you know, did the resurrection actually happen? Did Jesus really come back from the dead? And then you have someone like Jordan say, well, it's metaphorically true or it's mythically true. And, you know, people like Richard and I are like, what? What does that mean?
Right, what does that mean?
But to somebody who says, I believe it and it makes my life better, that's my truth. You know, who am I to say, no, it's not true? You know, you see where I'm going with that? These are kind of conflicting conversations I have with myself.
I've changed my stance on religion over the years, and then I think that the real benefit is that it acts as a moral scaffolding for a lot of people. And whether or not those things are true, that clearly, whether they're true or not, whether the origin was actually the Word of God, clearly they've been affected by human beings. Clearly human. I mean, when you read things in the Bible that treat women as second-class citizens and condone slavery and talk about murdering people for, you know, disobeying, clearly the work of man is involved in there somewhere. Because and we know people are full of shit, and we know that they lie.
Really?
Yeah, they lie in order to, you know, to prop up their better interests.
Yeah.
And there's clearly some of that in religion. But there's also a moral scaffolding involved in religion that seems to be very beneficial to some people because it allows them to live their life with a structure that they think is for the greater good.
And a meaning structure, too.
Yeah, and that helps them get by in life.
Right. Yes, if you think, well, what's the meaning of all, in 14 billion years there'll be no universe or whatever it is, then what's the point, right?
Existential angst.
Yeah, that's what people feel. But to me, I call that... and what do I call it? Who was the Woody Allen character in Annie Hall, where he goes back as a child? He won't do his homework, so his mom takes him to the psychiatrist. Why won't you do your homework? He says, the universe is expanding. What does that got to do? Well, one day the universe is going to all blow up because it's expanding. There's no point in doing my homework. And she says, what does that got to do with it? You live in Brooklyn, and Brooklyn's not expanding.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a great scene.
So,
I forgot about that.
In other words, it's the wrong level of analysis.
Right.
You shouldn't think about your meaning of life. 14 billion years, it won't have mattered what you do today. But it matters today to the people that you affect.
Yes. It was interesting, too, that you were talking about this earlier.
Alvy Singer, that was his character.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
You were talking about this earlier, that a lot of the, even the woke attitudes that people have and a lot of the progressive dogma that people talk about, it seems to be religious in nature. Mm-hmm. It seems to be that we almost have like a default way of looking at certain things, and that if we are atheists and we are separated from this moral scaffolding that is imparted upon us by religion, we'll find it in other things that we have culturally agreed upon.
Right. Right. So it's back to that question, why do we have to punish people who don't accept the dogma? I mean, why would that make a difference? What do I care what you think? Well, it does matter because we're social, and if you challenge me, that may undermine my worldview, so I need to stomp on that.
And I need you to be in agreement with me because it gives me comfort.
Right.
Right. It's like there's certain people out there that you could get that with. There's people that don't like if you have an Android phone.
Yeah, right.
Like, you should have Apple. I am Apple. You should be Apple. Why don't you switch over to Apple? They'll try to convince you. There's people that will convince you to go to AT&T. Verizon sucks. Why are you at the Verizon? People want you to be on the same page as them with everything because it affirms that their choices were good.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, yeah. Right. So we get our truths in part socially, like other people guide us in our youth, and professors and our teachers and books and experts, and we determine what's true in part by what other people believe. Mm-hmm. So you do depend on that. Yeah. Because none of us are smart enough to figure out the world on our own. So we have to have other people. And that's why we need communication like that. So, but the other people are sometimes wrong, right? Yeah. And so if our tribe believes, I call this tribal conspiracy, this is what our tribe believes. This is what we do, right? And so To challenge that may make me feel like I'm not part of my tribe anymore. Where's my moorings?
Right.
This is my group.
Right, right.
And so if you're Catholic, you believe this. If you're Mormon, you believe that. If you're Jewish, you believe this. And, that's like, I always point out to Christians this theologians that I debate on, the resurrection really happened. Here's the arguments. Here's the 6 best arguments, the empty tomb, and Mary was there and then the body was gone and this and that and this finger in the side and whatnot. Why, if these arguments are so good, why don't Jews accept Jesus as the Messiah who was crucified and resurrected? Well, if they understood the arguments, they would know that it's like they understand the arguments. I mean, these are smart rabbis that know a lot. Yeah. All right. It's that just not, that's not their truth. That's not their religion. That's not it.
Yeah, that's the real problem with religion, that there's so much variety.
Right, so there's no way to like run the experiment, which is the right one. Right. There's no experiment you can run to get. If a Martian came here and said, "Okay, what's the right religion?"
Yeah. Right, there'd be a world war to claim the proper religion to express to the Martians.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Right. So I do think again, if we lived, if you were chronically frozen and came back 1,000 years from now, and you found out all this stuff that we're talking about, oh, this was this, that's the explanation. Oh, dang. Yeah. I thought that was bullshit, right? So I don't want to do that, but there may be these, Mysterian mysteries, about the Mysterians. These are the philosophers who think our brains are just not structured or big enough to solve certain problems. We just can't know, like where the universe come from ultimately before the Big Bang. Why is there something rather than nothing? God's existence or free will. There's just certain things that are conceptually kind of don't make sense for our brains, like consciousness. This is why it's the hard problem of consciousness. It may be the wrong question.
Yeah.
It just is. Full stop. Why is there a universe? I don't know. It just is. And
it's also, if you think about this stage of evolution that we currently exist in, we think of this as the pinnacle. But if you went back to the early hominids and you tried to express any of the thoughts that we have today, or looked at the civilization that we've created, the cities, the flying airships, and the satellite images, and the fucking video flying through your cell phone to someone in New Zealand instantaneously.
Right.
All of it is witchcraft and voodoo and chaos.
Right.
If we keep going in whatever capacity, if we evolve to 1 million years from now, we're going to look back on this as like, what a bunch of goofs. What a bunch of silly, primitive people that couldn't even read each other's minds.
Right.
And they're just lying to each other and pretending polygraph tests are real and using hypnotic regression to try to uncover past truths. And God.
I know. I don't want to be that guy.
No.
But I don't want to be a sucker, too, and believe bullshit. They go, oh, you fell for that one.
They're in your book. It's a good way to end this. So it's available right now. Michael Shermer. Conspiracy, Why the Rational Believe the Irrational. Do we come to any conclusions here?
I think the conclusion was you have to read the book.
You have to read the book
to get the answer.
Did you do the audiobook?
I did. I read it.
Oh,
I sent you the audio file. So,
but I wanted to make sure that I didn't read it, but you read it.
I like reading. I like it when authors read their own books.
I do too.
It's so much better.
So much better.
Even if they don't have a great voice, I don't like my voice. But
at least I know it's coming from them.
Right.
Except when Stephen King reads his books. You shouldn't do that.
Oh, I haven't heard
other people do that.
Oh.
Yeah, he's terrible at it.
Well,
he's great author, but not so good at the.
For novels, I think a voice actor would be good.
I think so too.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you,
All right,
Michael.
Joe.
Appreciate you.
Nice to see you again.
Bye, everybody.